What is up, guys? It's Blue here. I just wanted to let you know this is a little bit of a different video than normal. It's gonna be a mega compilation of some of my greatest hits. Thinking about doing these, maybe a best of the month greatest hits or something every month or so. Let me know what you guys think. If you enjoy this sort of style with these longer videos, even if they're old stories, and I hope you enjoy. Against the advice of my parents, I started working in a bikini coffee stand when I was 17 years old, and continued working there until I was 20. If some of you are unfamiliar with these, they're little drive-through espresso stands, usually painted in some neon color, where all the employees wear lingerie or bikinis while they serve coffee. I know this sounds strange, and believe me, it is strange. However, the money was very good. It was fun at the time, and my parents couldn't really afford to pay for college. There's no loudspeaker where customers place their order. They simply drive up to the stand, order coffee, and make small talk as they oogle you in your skimpy ensemble. Anyway, it's kind of hard to explain, so maybe just Google it. The Seattle area has them all over the place. Within a matter of months, the boss gave me the busiest shift. The shift began at 4 a.m. and ended at 9:30 a.m. Though the coffee stand wasn't officially open until about 4:30, I had to count the till, grind the espresso beans, fill up the sinks, take stock, clean if needed, and everything. The coffee stand was situated in the corner of a large parking lot, sharing the enormous empty lot with only one other retailer. The other retailer didn't even open until 10 a.m., so when I arrived, the lot was completely dark save for one dim street lamp above the stand and another in the far corner of the lot. I pulled up to the stand as I normally did, only this time it was my first shift alone. Normally I worked with one other girl, as the shift would get far too busy for just one person. I had a routine with regular customers, as I literally worked every single day. The boss didn't believe in time off unless requested. While I worked, I could see cars approach the stand, and know immediately what drink to prepare based on recognizing a customer's vehicle. After almost a year on the morning shift, it was rare to see a new vehicle or meet a new customer. My boss was extremely strict about being fast and efficient, and would have us prepare drinks in advance for our regulars while they waited in the line of cars. My boss was so strict that for the first 6 months of my working there, he would watch constantly on his camera system and call me on the business phone to scream at me for lack of efficiency. After this, I became so fast at preparing drinks, I guess he decided he would save money by having me work alone in the very early morning hours. So, like normal, I approached the stand and punched in the access code. I went inside and turned on some music right away to keep myself company. The street lamp directly above the coffee stand had burnt out a few days before, so it was rather dark outside. Coupled with the tinted sliding windows of the coffee stand, and the knowledge that I was completely alone, I felt a little creeped out. Though not nearly as creeped out and terrified as I was about to feel in a few minutes. Even though the stand was technically open at 4:30, I wouldn't expect my first customer until about 4:45. I usually arrived at 4 a.m., but since it was my first shift alone, I came in at 3:30 to give myself enough time to complete all the opening tasks. My first customer was always Dave. He drove a red sports car and ordered a double cappuccino heavy on the foam. He worked for the local Boeing plant and would brag about his high-ranking job in between awkward remarks about my body. You get used to this sort of thing after a while, but nothing could prepare me for the sort of thing that happened to me on this particular dark morning. Though many of our customers were pervy men like Dave, most of our early morning customers weren't as lecherous as one would expect. They simply needed coffee, and no other business was open as early as ours. In fact, many of my early morning customers were married women in soccer mom vans in desperate need of caffeine. I glanced up at the clock as I counted the money in the till. 3:50 a.m. I finished the count and walked from the back of the stand onto the main floor. There were 2 steps separating the back of the stand from the main floor. The back of the stand had no windows and contained a bathroom, large refrigerator, washer, dryer, etc. This is the area where my coworkers and myself would get ready and joke around when customers couldn't see us. As soon as we walked onto the main floor where customers could see us, though, uniform was required, as well as heels. I counted up all of the syrup bottles. I opened the fridge and took stock inside. I turned on the espresso grinder and robotically poured in a bag of espresso beans. I started filling up the large commercial sink with soapy water. Music played softly on the stereo, but then I heard it. Over the faucet, the coffee grinder, and the music. I wasn't sure I heard anything at first, so I just ignored it. Then I heard it again. Someone was tapping on the sliding glass window of the stand. I wiped off my wet hands and grabbed my cell phone. 4:15 a.m. We weren't open for another 15 minutes. I checked the light switches to make sure I didn't accidentally flip on the open sign. Along with an open sign, the stand was equipped with bright floodlights to illuminate the presence of the stand. Due to the sheer darkness that morning, I had contemplated turning on the floodlights when I first arrived, but it was strictly forbidden to do so until the stand was open. Without the floodlights on and through the tinted glass, I couldn't see who was on the other side. I stood there staring at the window. Maybe it's just Dave, I rationalized to myself. I could hear my heart thumping in my ears. The tapping had definitely grown louder. I picked up the business phone and punched in my boss's number. He had an extensive camera system, complete with night vision, and could see in real time both inside and outside of the stand. In the very least, he could tell me who was outside. The phone rang, and I got no answer. I flipped on the floodlights. I walked over to the window and saw the man now illuminated in the lights. His head was pressed up against the glass, hands cupped around his eyes as he tried to see in. I jumped back. "Hi," he yelled through the glass. "Can I get some coffee?" We aren't open for another 15 minutes, I replied. "My boss will be mad if I open early." "Oh, well, I can wait." The man then walked back away from the window and stepped into a small black Honda. I continued my opening duties, wearily eyeing the car. At the time, I felt a false sense of security, lulled into the daily routine of my shift. However, this was different. At 4:30, I dutifully turned on the open sign and watched as the man in the black Honda drove up to the window. He was wearing a dark red baseball cap, a thermal shirt, and plaid pajama pants. "Hi, sorry about that. What can I get for you this morning?" I said, trying to sound as normal as possible. The man looked at me for what felt like an eternity. "What I want doesn't appear to be on the menu," he said, not looking up from my crotch. "Okay, so I know what you're thinking. What did I expect working in this profession, gentlemen?" I brushed his comment aside with a laugh. "We have a great white chocolate mocha." I looked around frantically. Where the fuck was the usual morning guy, Dave? I silently prayed another customer would pull up behind this guy. He looked away and stared at his steering wheel. "I want you to be my maid." "Excuse me?" I said, not sure if I heard him correctly. "I want you to be my maid. I want you to come over to my house wearing a maid costume with nothing underneath. I want to watch you, and if you don't clean correctly, I'm going to do whatever I want to you." He paused and gripped his steering wheel tightly. "I'm not a nice guy." He looked up at me and smiled. Until that point in my life, I had never seen a truly sinister smile before. I slammed the long serving window shut. I ran to the back of the stand, hyperventilating at this point. I picked up the phone and called my boss repeatedly. No answer. I stood on the steps and peered out the window. The black Honda was gone, replaced by the familiar red of Dave's sports car. I never thought I would be happy to see pervy Dave, but here I was rushing to the serving window to tell him about what had happened. I opened the window, all while frantically relaying the story. Dave just laughed and muttered something about the guy dreaming. He told me that I was being a bit paranoid and that the guy probably just had no filter. For some reason, this put me at ease. Dave reached his hand out the window to place a $5 bill in my tip jar. He usually tipped this amount each morning. "Wow," he exclaimed. "You just opened and your tip jar is already full." I know you make good coffee, but it's not that great." "Huh?" I said, slamming the register shut. The tip jar rested on the outside window ledge, so customers could reach it. I made it a habit of just leaving it outside in between customers, as it could get very busy. I leaned over and looked into the metal canister. Inside the tip jar was a long white envelope that appeared to be stuffed to its capacity. My stomach turned, as I knew it had to be from the guy in the black Honda. "Dave," I said cautiously, "it's from that guy I just told you about. I'm not opening that." Dave sipped his cappuccino, and suddenly his goofy demeanor turned serious. "You're right. Let me open it. I have some gloves here." It was late fall and rather cold out. Dave put his gloves on in a dramatic manner, laughing about my paranoia, and proceeded to step outside his car. He took the envelope out of my tip jar and opened it. "Holy shit," he said, his eyes widening. He held up a stack of $20 bills held together by a rubber band. On the back of the stack was a folded piece of paper. He unfolded the paper and began to read it, and his eyes grew even wider. His hands started to shake slightly. What does it say?" He simply said, "Get dressed and call the police now." I snatched the note from him, his jaw slightly agape. The note was laden with spelling errors, and looked as if it was written in a child's hand. Oddly, there were rather long words that were attempted but spelled incorrectly. It said some very deranged things. There are some things too sick to even mention here, but I will relay the basic message as best as I can recall. Some things you just never forget, even if you want to. "You will come to my house. When you arrive, I will examine you thoroughly. I will then tie you to the post, and you will be punished for what you do. Every inch of your body will be bruised and sore. Afterward, I will untie you and use you in every way possible." He used a different term, but it was extremely graphic and includes the words hog-tied. "You can scream, but no one will hear you. This is your first payment. Upon reading this note and taking this money, you have agreed to follow through. If you do not follow through, you are a stealing, lying whore, and you will be punished more severely than if you cooperated to this initial agreement. You will clean every inch of my house. There will be no mistakes, or there will be much more severe punishment to follow." I got dressed and called the police, and my boss, who finally answered. The police arrived, and I went to the station to explain in detail what had happened. I handed them the note along with the money for evidence. The female police officer, who appeared to be in charge, nonchalantly told me that I should probably quit my job, that this behavior was to be expected from customers. I told her that I had never experienced anything like this before. My boss reviewed the outside videotape footage. The footage showed a man standing outside of the coffee stand window just staring inside. Occasionally it showed him leaning his head into the glass and cupping his hands around his eyes for a better view. It also showed him rubbing his crotch. Apparently he had been standing outside the window since 3:40 a.m., 10 minutes after my initial arrival. At one point, it showed him going back into his car only to re-emerge several minutes later and finally tap on the window. I was shocked to realize that the man had watched me for almost a full hour without my knowledge. I felt stupid, but most of all scared. The footage also revealed that the man had his license plates covered with what appeared to be white paper. After reviewing the footage and the note, the police decided that the man posed a serious threat and that his behavior was not normal. They sent an undercover cop back to the stand with me. I was shocked that they wanted me to go right back to work not even 2 hours after the incident. The cop sat outside in an SUV while I worked. The plan was this. If the man drove through again, I was to flick the open sign on and off to alert him to the man's presence. I worked serving all of my regular customers, trying my best to pretend that nothing happened. I was told not to recall the incident to any of my coworkers or customers that morning, in case they knew the man and warned him of police involvement. The man didn't return that day, but he did return. Little did I know that was only the beginning of a year-long nightmare. The stalking continued for a while, about a year. The stalker left endless creepy gifts for me both at work and at my place of residence, all of which he signed off on as Turner. It got to a point where I couldn't prove it was him, because it would often be sent by a courier or a third party. He continued to come by the stand, and at one point even promised to leave me alone. My coworker was there, and we actually managed to have a brief discussion in which he apologized and agreed that his behavior was inappropriate. However, he resumed his creepy behavior just days later. The police were of no help, and kept insisting to me that it would all magically go away if I just quit my job. I had his license plate, which was from out of state, and a vehicle description, but apparently the car wasn't even registered. I didn't know this was a possibility. Despite taking a leave of absence, the stalking continued. I didn't want to quit my job, as this was shortly after the recession. My mom, the sole provider for a family of 5, had lost her job, so I wanted to chip in and help her so they wouldn't lose the house. Other bikini stands in the area were not hiring, due to being embroiled in prostitution scandals, all of which were heavily covered by the national media. You have no idea how hard it was, and maybe still is, to get a normal job after having worked as a bikini barista. And the few of the scariest incidences were being assaulted in an ice freezer outside of the coffee stand, Turner coming through the drive-thru completely naked and jacking off into a pair of women's underwear. Another incident occurred where my friend gave me a joint a customer had left for me on her shift. Crazy as it may sound, customers fairly often would leave joints in my tip jar instead of money. I liked to smoke a lot at the time. I asked my coworker for the customer's name, but she never got a chance to ask for it. I was told by my friend coworker that he had long hair and looked like a hippie. I smoked the joint before I went to sleep one night, only to have a massive freakout, full of hallucinations and hysteria. I literally thought I saw ghosts, demons, and fire. I ended up in the hospital. I found out in the hospital that in addition to having marijuana in my system, it had also been laced with PCP as well. Later on, Turner would take credit for this by sending a text to my phone, letting me know that if I wanted him to smoke me out that we could get together sometime. Of course, I gave his number to the police. I feel like I gave them enough information to get this guy, but I was just never taken seriously, or they always had bigger fish to fry. They did find out, however, that the phone he used was a burner. In this period of time, it was evident that one of my coworkers was sharing my personal information with Turner in exchange for money. This coworker was later arrested on prostitution charges. I ended up relocating and changing my last name. I did this primarily to get away from Turner, but also so I could get a fresh start with a new employment history and get away from the negative energy that encircled my life. It may seem strange to you, but after a while, stalking becomes a part of your life. It's kind of like living around a bunch of rattlesnakes. You may feel constantly on guard and on edge, but eventually you work your daily routine around trying your best to avoid the snakes so you won't get bitten. When it happens, you do your best to move on. I've recently found out that a man fitting my stalker's description was incarcerated some time ago for doing something even more frightening to another barista in the PNW. There were also similar incidences and reports of a man driving through bikini stands naked or with women's underwear. I suspect that this man was most likely Turner. I can't be sure if it's the same person, as I was never able to find out this person's true first and last name, but I'm hopeful that it is him, and he'll be locked away for a very long time. So I used to be a CNA at a hospital in Missouri. Our general job description is to take vitals at specified times, document input and output, and then just help patients with whatever they need. But occasionally, we have to be a sitter for someone, which usually means the person is being crazy, or is on suicide watch and needs to have someone with them at all times. Being a youngish and relatively average-looking female, I've had my fair share of creepy and weird hospital patient stories. I've been bitten, kicked, groped, and all that. But this particular story is probably a moment that actually made me realize that people can be terrifying creatures. More background. The hospital I worked at was hit by a tornado in May 2011. and sometime after, our behavioral health facility was relocated to a much more secluded area, very close to the border of Missouri and Kansas, though only a few miles from town. I'm talking, you could see all the stars outside and hear coyotes in the distance. It seriously felt like the scene of a potential horror movie during my smoke breaks outside there. I worked overnights, and though I usually work cardiac, I was called over to behavioral health to be a sitter. I was a little creeped out just because of that. I remember thinking about what we would even do if the power went out and stuff, which actually did happen later, but I wasn't there. No one escaped, but all the doors auto-unlocked. I get to work, and upon receiving report on the patient, the daytime tech tells me this. I honestly don't even know why he needs a sitter. He's so nice and polite. He calls me ma'am and held the door open for me and stuff. He did sort of get into a fight with another patient, so that's why he has to have a sitter. But the other patient started it, and he isn't even here anymore. You're gonna have a pretty easy night, girl. So I sit next to the guy and try to relax. I honestly wasn't that worried about being in the men's area, because generally the women's ward is much more known for causing trouble and violent outbursts. Also, in Missouri, most patients are just bipolar or schizophrenic and off their meds, or drug addicts and people who admit themselves because they can't afford the help they need. And this guy was super nice. He was totally polite and asked about my tattoos. He enthusiastically showed me the bear he had tattooed on his arm and stuff like that. As time passed, the night continued to be relatively uneventful, and as bedtime came, around 9 p.m., the guy got into bed and went to sleep. In his room, I situated myself on the floor in the corner near an outlet so I could read my Kindle with my back against the wall. Keep in mind here that while I had worked in the hospital for a while, I had only worked in behavioral health one other time, and never really got the specific kind of training that the psych techs get. Like how you're always supposed to walk behind everyone so your back is to no one, and such safety measures. We did have alarm buttons that clipped onto our scrubs, but they were apparently pretty flimsy, because when I took a lunch at 3 a.m., I noticed mine on the floor, slightly under the patient's bed. The guy slept fairly well until around 1 a.m. Around that time, he started to wake up and just sat in his bed staring at me. I didn't want to appear nervous, and I wasn't really allowed to leave his room anyway, so I would just say hi, tell him the time, and suggest that he still had some time to sleep before breakfast. He had such a weird blank expression on his face, and he would stare at me and then ask if he could call his parents because he had some things he needed to discuss with them. I would just reiterate the time and tell him he could call in the morning. Around 3 a.m., I took my lunch with the nurse who was assigned to my patient. While we were eating, she told me she couldn't believe I was brave enough to sit in his room, all things considered. I asked what she was talking about, and said since he only needed a sitter for fighting some other dude, I wasn't really worried. And that's when the nurse proceeded to tell me that the man was admitted because he kept threatening to murder his parents, that incidents kept escalating from him making telephone threats to bringing a gun to dinner with them, until finally they brought him in when he started leaving corpses of violently slaughtered animals on his parents' doorstep. She told me that when they went into his trailer, there were a bunch of gutted and dead animals in his home, and there was blood and feces smeared all over the walls. So I don't know if the daytime girl didn't know all that, but I definitely had myself cornered in this guy's room. I was in the spot literally the furthest place from the door, with an alarm button that had fallen off of me half in the night anyway. This was a guy who was showing serial killer symptoms, and I was told that he only needed extra care because another patient had initiated a fight with him. So my Psycho X stalker story happened on the west coast of the United States about 11 years ago. I was a 23-year-old female living in my very first apartment. I was single, working part-time and going to college, so I was more focused on getting my life together than dating. Valentine's Day was fast approaching, and of course I didn't have a special someone in my life at the time, so a coworker of mine thought it would be a good idea to hook me up with a single guy she knew named Jack. Jack and I talked on the phone for a few days before meeting in person. When we eventually met, Jack brought flowers, candy, and immediately told me how attracted he was to me, even saying that I was his girl now. It struck me as kind of an odd thing to say, as it was our first time meeting, but I thought he was really handsome. He was 6'1", I'm 5'3". He had a gorgeous smile and seemed really sweet, so I just brushed the oddness off. We hung out for a few weeks, and during that time, Jack started acting very strange and clingy. He was very quiet and liked to ask questions about me and told me a lot about his personal life. But besides a simple hi, he basically ignored and never spoke to any of my family or friends who came to visit often. He always wanted to occupy my time, wanted to know what I was doing all the time, and would get angry if I was busy or had other plans. He wasn't physically abusive, but he was really possessive. He even told me he loved me a month or so after knowing me, but I kind of laughed it off thinking he was joking around. One night, he actually got on his knees to propose to me. I told him we'd only been knowing each other for a few months, and we should wait until we're both ready, and besides, he didn't even have a ring. He said he was ready to get married as soon as possible. We could go to the courthouse now and he'd buy me a ring later. No, thank you. If it's meant to be, we'll get married when the time comes. The very next week, he gets back on his knees and proposes again, still no ring, pressuring me and saying he was ready now. At this point, I started to freak out a little bit. Not only was he very clingy, but he was moving way too fast for me. I mean, we'd only been dating a couple of months. I was still busy with work and school, so I told him maybe we should take a break from hanging out for a while. He got this really weird look on his face and got really quiet, but eventually started smiling and agreed with me that we should take a break. After a few days of not hearing from him, I came home to find him sitting on my staircase. I ask him what he's doing there, and he just tells me that he's waiting for me and smiles. After an awkward moments of silence, I tell him that he needs to go home. He got up and left, but then he started randomly stopping by my place. If I was ever there, I tried to pretend not to be. He would knock for about 30 minutes, leave for a couple, and then come back. He started waiting on my staircase for me to get home so much, I had to hide at a neighbor's apartment and wait until he eventually left. He called my cell phone non-stop, and I just ignored him. After a couple of months of this, he just stopped all of a sudden. I was relieved that he might have finally gotten the point. After about 3 months of not hearing from him, I get a call from an unfamiliar number. I answered, and it was Jack. He wanted to know how I was doing, and he wanted to come and see me. He also said he'd told his mother about me, and she wanted to meet me too. I got super creeped out and a bit upset, and I told him no, to lose my number and stop calling me. I guess he heard the opposite, because he started randomly knocking on my door again. He knocked on my door a couple of times, and each time I had a friend or family member tell him to leave, and not come back. Each time he smiled and said he understood. The third time he came over was the last straw for me. I had my best friend tell him I wasn't there. I was, but I was in hiding. He asked her if he could wait for me inside my apartment until I got back. She told him no, and then he tried to force his way in. My friend called my name, and I ran out to help her shut the door. Heart racing, I told him I was going to call the police if he didn't leave, and to never come back again. He mumbled something through the door, and then I could hear him walking down the stairs. I ended up not calling the police that night, but I regret that decision to this day. Jump forward about 5 or 6 months later. It was a bright, sunny Saturday afternoon. 2 of my younger sisters, 17 and 14, were visiting. I was still laying in my bed because I had a major migraine. Since I lived alone, I'd gotten used to leaving my bedroom door open so I could hear everything. I could hear them watching and talking about Vanilla Sky, the Tom Cruise movie. I could also hear kids laughing and playing outside. Nothing weird whatsoever. I took more aspirin, then dozed off again, but I was shortly awoken by a loud bam. At first, I thought maybe a kid had bounced a ball or something off my door. Then I heard it again, and my sister started yelling, "What the hell is that?" Just as I was about to get up to see what was going on, bam. I heard screaming, and then a man's voice yelling, "Get the fuck up!" I started to panic, so this part might sound kinda fucked up, but since I had no clue what was going on or who the persons were, I slowly closed my door, blocked it with a dresser, sat on the floor in front of it, and called 911. In my state of mind, I thought it would be better to get the police over ASAP, instead of risking my life even further by running into an unknown situation. Maybe the intruder didn't know it was a third person there. Anyway, I told the operator someone had broken into my apartment, and sounded like he was threatening my sisters and that the police needed to come fast. The operator asked me a lot of questions about how many or what the intruders looked like, but of course I couldn't say because I was still laying in my bed when it started. While I'm speaking with the 911 operator, I could hear the man's voice asking, "Where's your sister? She doesn't know what I had to do for her. I love her." I heard more screams, and then I heard, "She's in the room." At that point, my heart started beating triple time. I don't know why they told this person where I was. Maybe just out of pure terror, or maybe getting me back for not coming out of my room to check the situation. But next thing I know, my bedroom door was being kicked hard. So hard I thought I actually started sliding across the floor. The intruder stops kicking at my door and yells, "If you don't open the door right now, I'll kill everybody." I was so scared, literally crying and begging, asking the 911 operator where the police were at. The whole ordeal was only about 5 minutes, but in a situation like this, time slows way down, and it seemed like it went on for hours. I guess the intruder must have heard me talking to 911, because all of a sudden he stopped and took off running out of the apartment. I was still on the phone, crying with the door shut, and one of my sisters knocked and said it was okay to come out because he was gone. I opened the door and asked who he was. They said it was Jack. I couldn't believe it. In broad daylight, Jack kicked in my door with a sawed-off shotgun and threatened to kill my sisters and myself. The police ended up catching him about a week or so later. During this time, I found out through the police report that there was a previous incident that occurred with Jack a couple of weeks before mine. The police were called because someone was shooting a shotgun in the air. When the police arrived, they found Jack playing with the gun. They asked why, and Jack had said because someone had broken into his apartment, stole his weed, and cut off the tip of his tongue. Not even kidding. The police just issued him a ticket. Anyway, I actually helped catch him by giving them one of his family members' addresses that I found in the phone book, and they caught him headed to their house. He confessed right there, but after he was arrested, he pled not guilty. He ended up taking a plea deal and only ended up serving 5 years. I moved to a different state after that. The even scarier part I found out later is that when he got released, he moved into a halfway house literally right across the street from my old apartment where he kicked my door in. 11 years have passed, and I still don't feel completely safe. I feel at any moment I could run into him randomly, or hear my door being kicked in again. I move constantly, change my number every year. I carry pepper sprays and tasers with me everywhere I go, and never go to bed without checking if the doors and windows are locked tight. I even put a chair under the doorknob before I go to sleep at night. This is a little story about a creep. A creep who thought he had all the power in the world. A creep who probably had a horrific childhood, but a creep nonetheless. Anyway, I first befriended this creep online back in 2011. Facebook, of course. We had mutual friends. Friends who I trusted. so I assumed he was a cool guy. I know now that's a terrible assumption to make about strangers, whether you have mutual friends or not. But back then, I was a naive 18-year-old girl. His name was Danny. I thought he was a cool guy at first. He had an awesome taste in music, and shared a lot of great songs with me. He was also incredibly and appropriately hilarious. He was full of jokes and bizarre stories, and I soon grew to love talking to him. He never asked if I had a boyfriend. I assumed he knew I did. After all, we were Facebook friends now, and there were pictures of my boyfriend everywhere. It's not like I kept my relationship status hidden. It was right there for all to see. But I guess he didn't know. One day, in October, he decided to tell me how he felt about me. He recited a poem he'd written, comparing me to a beautifully and elegantly handcrafted tapestry. And keep in mind, I've never even met the guy, and we'd only been talking for a month or so. I responded with something along the lines of, "Wow, I wish my boyfriend said stuff like that." He got angry. So angry. He asked me how I could have let him on like this. He asked me how I could do this to him. He told me that he had opened his heart to me. He begged and pleaded, and supposedly, he cried. I was beyond puzzled. I decided to give him some space, and it worked for a few days, but he eventually messaged me again. He may have apologized, but I can't honestly remember the exact conversation. I do know that things returned to normal, and he became silly and fun again. At this point, I had his Skype, and he had mine. I would talk to him there sometimes, but I never used the camera. I didn't feel comfortable with it. Actually, I hated using the camera with anyone. I told him that when he started to beg me to use it, but he never relented. Still, I just kept making excuses. Danny wasn't having it. He got more aggressive, and then he got sexual. He told me to Skype naked with him. Time after time, I told him no. Eventually, I blocked him on Skype, but ended up having dozens of angry messages on AIM. I don't remember exactly what he said, although I do have screenshots of all of it on an external hard drive somewhere. I remember it being hateful and absolutely insane, and there was some stuff about me being a really awful friend as well. Before long, he told me he was an excellent hacker. He told me he had a whole slew of hacker friends as well. He told me he could change my college grades and make me fail, and that he would make my life a living hell. I didn't necessarily believe this at all, but I did believe he would do something. Despite these negative confrontations, we still had periods of silliness. During these periods, things were normal. I felt safe, to an extent. I tried to keep him happy, because I wanted to stay in his good graces. I really did believe he would try to tarnish my reputation otherwise. Before long, he started giving me ultimatums. Either you get on Skype with me, or things will get very bad for you. I can tell your boyfriend you're cheating on him. I eventually asked our mutual friends about him. They said he was violent, dangerous, and twisted. Even better, he lived mere minutes away from the college we attended in Reading, Pennsylvania. Every day, I started to get more panicked about going to school. While on campus, I'd look around for guys that looked like him, guys with long red hair and beards, and I'd be wary of anyone who even slightly resembled him. At this point, I was honestly convinced he'd show up and try to find me. I had him blocked on AIM and made a new Skype. I knew this would infuriate him, and it did. I received another batch of messages on Facebook about how I needed to learn to treat people better. I told him I was uncomfortable with what he was asking of me, and he responded with something along the lines of, "Fine, you've chosen your fate." I blocked him on Facebook. I'd had enough of him terrorizing me. but I should have known it wouldn't be the last time I'd hear from him. At the end of November, I received 3 Facebook messages from someone named Adam Knowing. Whoever he was, he just joined Facebook a couple of weeks ago, and he had no friends or content. The message read as follows. November 27th, 2011. You've been warned repeatedly, and are now being served notice. November 29th, 2011. I believe this is your last warning, and that you've been informed of your behavioral issues. The situation will change before the start of the next weekend, where action will be taken. November 30th, 2011. So you attend college, right? And your grades are passing? Not for long. You were warned on how to treat him, and how you are to act. You've got until this week's end to correct this behavior, or life becomes a very difficult thing for you. You should never treat someone who has a life like his the way that you do. To this day, I'm not sure who Adam Knowing was. It could have been Danny, or it could have been one of his low-life hacker friends. Either way, I was terrified at the time. Against my better judgment, I unblocked Danny on Facebook. By now, my boyfriend was aware of the situation, and he suggested I contact the police if things got any worse. Maybe I should have, but Danny hadn't officially done anything to me. What could they do? Still, I took screenshots of all his screen names. I saved our chat logs on AIM. I took screenshots of all of his threatening messages, and I saved it all to a folder, just in case I needed evidence. Danny's nonsense continued right through Christmas. Some days he'd be sweet and funny. Others he was back to being angry and pressuring. I promised him a Skype session to calm him down, but I kept using my schoolwork as an excuse to delay it. Shortly after Christmas, I blocked him again on all accounts. I decided I would deal with whatever repercussions that came with. If I did end up being hacked, at least I had evidence, right? A couple of weeks went by and nothing happened. Then I received a Facebook message from another account I didn't recognize. I don't remember the name of this one, but I remember the message. After careful consideration, you're being let go. You may want to do the respectful thing and thank the one who you've wronged. It's only thanks to his compassion that you're being forgiven so easily. I blocked the account immediately. In January of 2012, something magical happened. I woke up one morning to the news that Danny had been arrested. The charges? Possession and distribution of child pornography. A bunch of his creepy friends had been arrested with him, having been involved as well. In 2013, Danny was indicted. He's looking at up to 60 years, which will make him almost 90 when he gets out. Even if he's released early, he'll be supervised for the rest of his life. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to post the link to the news story, but it is online. I guess being a monster creep catches up with you eventually. I just got back from a sleepover. By Nova Rasta. My mom has always been iffy about me going to sleepover since I was a kid. I'm 20 now, in university, but being a broke college student, still live with my parents who have never neglected to treat me like their little baby. Truth be told, I'm extremely thankful to be so loved by my parents, and I infinitely love them back, but at times it can become suffocating. I met Myra last semester in junior English, and we hit it off almost immediately. She was one of those people you just instantly connect with and become very good friends with, very fast. She wasn't native to my city, and said that she was originally from Chicago. She was a beautiful girl, and I thought she was much prettier than I was, but she disagreed. I would sometimes even catch her looking at me with this intensely focused admiration. It really did wonders to my confidence. She was sweet, very intelligent, and seemed normal enough, and we shared similar tastes and hobbies. I was majoring in kinesiology, and she in physiology. We both loved parties, dolphins, and Malaysian food, but perhaps the oddest similarity we shared was a strong and rather secretive penchant for Barbie dolls. My love for Barbie dolls and their pretty faces had stuck with me since I was a child, perhaps because I still feel like a kid sometimes. For Myra, she said it was more about the design, the perfect intricateness of the clothes, the hair and body parts, as she described it. It wasn't long before we made plans to hang out outside of school, and she invited me to a sleepover on the following Saturday and encouraged me to bring all my dolls. I can't wait to meet them. I asked my mom if I could go the next day. You barely know this girl. Do you like her, Mom? I invited her to come over next week. I was convinced that Myra would become a long-term friend, one that would eventually form a bond with my parents as well. Hesitantly, my mom agreed to let me go, but insisted that I come home immediately on Sunday morning. I nodded. Saturday couldn't have come any sooner. I packed my 4 favorite dolls in a duffel bag and my sleepover gear in another. Myra came and picked me up in a blue Sentra. As soon as I got in, she smiled warmly and offered me a shot of Grey Goose. It was vodka on a Saturday night. I couldn't say no. I ended up taking 4 shots on an empty stomach, and being the lightweight that I am, quickly reached the intimidating boundary between impeded consciousness and completely blacking out. We got back to her place, though I couldn't exactly pinpoint where we had driven to. I could make out that she lived in a rented, ramshackle house on the outskirts of the city. It was cheap and I'm broke, she laughed as she explained. My vision continued to spin and wobble incessantly. She helped me up the splintery front porch, and we stepped inside. It was meticulously kept. Books, photos, and furniture were all perfectly organized. Wow, Myra. OCD much? We both just giggled. We made our way into what I think was the living room, and sat down on the musty cherry brown rug. She brought me some bread and a glass of water to sober up. Okay, are we seriously gonna play with Barbies now? I'm pretty fucked up. I could tell I was slurring at this point. Well, maybe you shouldn't have drank so much, you idiot. Here, let's just watch TV for now. Hopefully you'll sober up soon. Myra was strangely calm. If I invited a friend over for the night and she was too drunk to function before the night had even begun, I'd be pretty agitated, or at least a little bit disappointed. She put on an episode of Friends. I barely managed to stumble onto the lime green couch on the side of the room. I remember hearing the clap in the theme song, and only staying awake for a couple more minutes after that. After that, I slowly drifted off into darkness. The next day, I awoke to see that I was no longer on the couch anymore. I was laying on bare hardwood floor with a thin pillow under my head and a wool blanket sprawled across me. I was so hungry and still exhausted. I looked up to face a single dim light bulb in the center of the flaky gray ceiling and a set of stairs on the other side of the tiny dark room. I was in a basement. My bag of clothes beside me, but the bag of Barbies was missing. My phone was beside the bag in a pool of sticky red liquid, dead. I hadn't bothered to bring my charger, as I was only staying the night and didn't care too much for excessively using my phone. My stiff body ached tremendously. I focused and took in my surroundings for about 5 seconds, before I became blinded by a deafening headache. It didn't stop after that. Worst hangover ever. I held my head and felt cloth wrapped around it. "Myra?" I struggled to call out, my voice dry and raspy. No response. The sides of my head continued to pound in agony. What the fuck happened last night? I slowly crawled into the shiny metal boiler in the corner of the room to catch a glimpse of what I looked like. My tired eyes sunk into dark circles. My skin was filthy, caked with a sticky layer of gray dirt. The ragged cloth covering most of my head was dark blue, coated with splotches of dried blood. Had I fallen somewhere? "Myra!" I called out again, even louder. The thumping inside my head grew stronger as I stumbled up the wooden stairs. All of her books and possessions were gone. The lime green couch and a couple of chairs remained. It was like she had moved out overnight. She and every trace of her were just gone. My money was still in my wallet, so she hadn't conned me for monetary gain as I had first assumed. I gathered my belongings and hurried out of the house. My eyes narrowed. The surge of bright golden sunlight hit me like a truck, and I fell to my knees. My headache was unbearable. I don't know how long I was withering in pain before I finally regained the will to stand back up. I walked over to the narrow dirt road that passed beside the small house. Luckily, luck was on my side, and I noticed a rusted silver Ford pickup truck hurling dirt behind it, driving towards me shortly after. I waved frantically and the truck rolled to a stop. It was an elderly couple. "Hey there, are you okay?" the man called in a concerned tone. "To be honest, sir, I have no idea where I am, and I'd just like to get home." "Well, we're a long way from the city. Perhaps you'd like to get to a hospital first, sweetheart." The lady looked worriedly at my head. All I could think of was my mom. I had never gone to a doctor's appointment, let alone to the hospital, without her, and I wasn't planning on today. "Thank you, but I'm fine, ma'am. My mother is expecting me." "All right, get in," the man said hesitantly. I threw my bag inside and we drove away from the mysterious little house. "Where to?" "Sheridan, Pittsburgh, please." I continued to hold my head. I had no idea what to think. Where the fuck was Myra? Why had she just left me? A medley of sadness, pain, and utter confusion consumed me. I felt like I had been gone forever, completely dissociated from the present. The subtle heat of the fall afternoon became magnified through the windows of the old truck. It was probably long past the morning I'd told my mom I'd be home during. "Would you mind telling me the time?" "It's 2:44 p.m., October the 15th, the old lady said cheerily. The pain in my head stopped, paralyzed by the immense fear that suddenly engulfed me. It was October the 15th, but the plans for our sleepover were for the 28th of September. I had been unconscious and inside that house for almost 2 weeks. God knows what had happened during that time. Nervously, I uttered a soft moan. The lady looked at me worriedly, but I didn't want to go into detail. "It's just this headache. It hurts so much." I broke into loud sobs. "Let me take a look at your head, love. I was a nurse for 30 years. Jim, turn to the hospital. We're getting this young lady some help right away." "No, really, it's fine. I just want to go home to my mom." "Trust me, sweetheart, your parents will thank us." With nothing to lose, I consented. Jim pulled over briefly to let his wife climb into the back with me and continue to drive. She raised her trembling, ancient hands to my head and started to unwrap the cloth. I shrieked in anguish. I could feel raw skin ripping off the top of my head. A wound? The lady had only unwrapped the cloth off about a quarter of my head before she gasped and swiftly recoiled with sheer horror painted across her face, her eyes wide. What's wrong?" I whimpered anxiously. The lady covered her wrinkled mouth with her hand and pointed to the side of my head. I pulled myself up to look in the rearview mirror. My exposed head was patterned with streaks of red and pink. A swarm of little ivory maggots feasted on the glistening raw flesh that burned excruciatingly upon touch. My hair was completely gone. I had been scalped. I almost fell unconscious from terror until I noticed a red gash deeper down the side of my head. I struggled to pull the cloth back more, and then I saw it. At that point, the shock of discovery outweighed my threshold for pain. I had to see the rest to confirm my suspicion. I ripped the rest of the cloth off my head to face reality in full. Hot drips of crimson blood ran down my face, into my mouth, all over my clothes and onto the seat. And the lady screamed loud enough that it caused Jim to swerve suddenly and pull over. He too looked back and let out a frightful cry. Myra, that fucking bitch. She'd taken all of my hair, and both of my ears. The subtle rustling of the maggots continued. I've never had any experiences that really freaked me out, except this one. I was around 11 years old and was with my sister and her friends. We're all girls. They were all around 16 years old and were taking me trick-or-treating. We were going door to door to get candy and playing with silly string. I kept getting this weird feeling, like I was looking behind me constantly and I had no idea why. Around 9:30 p.m., I turned around quickly and there was this guy dressed up as a clown about 2 yards behind us. I wasn't really scared about this because I like clowns, and since this was the first time I saw him, I figured he was just trick-or-treating. But he followed us for another hour, never getting candy, and waiting for us at each house we stopped at. At this point, I was stressing, and told my sister about the clown. She decided that we try to go a completely different route, and see if he still followed us. So we all crossed the street, and sure enough, he did. My sister absolutely hates clowns, and was freaked out, so she called our dad to come pick us up. We continued walking for around 30 minutes, until our dad called us, saying we was parked. We all started walking fast towards the direction of my dad's car, but that's when the clown ran in front of us and tried to corner us. I think he knew that we were trying to leave. My sister and her friends were freaking out, and me, being a naive and outspoken kid, yelled at the clown to leave us alone. I remember that he tilted his head to the side when I said that, kind of like a confused dog. I grabbed my sister's silly string and told the clown that if he didn't leave us alone, I'd ruin his outfit with the silly string. Again, I was a naive kid. I actually thought he would be scared of the silly string. The clown didn't back off, so I stringed him all over his masking costume. While I did this, my sister called our dad again, telling him to hurry to where we were. The clown struggled to get the string off his mask so he could see, but we were already running. My dad came around the corner and we all rushed inside the car. The clown caught up with us and tried to open the car door, but it was locked. As my dad hit the gas, the clown slammed his hands onto the back window. I remember watching him out the back window, trying to chase the car but failing. I never figured out what was up with that clown, but there were other reports of a clown with the same description chasing kids in the area. "2002. I was 14 years old and starting freshman year. I was an awkward, nerdy girl that didn't know how to handle attention from boys, so you could say I made things worse for my situation. I had a knack for making friends with the weird people that no one liked, but I tried to be friendly with everyone I met, so it wasn't a big deal for me. Clubs were a big deal, and they actually had an anime club, so of course I was all about that. At the first club meeting, I sat next to a couple of friends and just soaked it all up. I thought I was finally with my people. Then here comes Stalker Kid. I'd use his real name, but to this day I have no idea what it is. He sat in front of me, and being that person, I said hi. I could tell he was a bit uncomfortable and didn't know anyone at the event, so I was just being nice. And boy, did this guy cling to me for that one word. At first, he would just find me during lunch and just stand there mumbling things to me. He had such a soft, high-pitched voice, a mousy little guy that you just felt unnerved when he spoke to you. The way he would look at you as he spoke, I could never look him in the eyes. After a while, it became more asking about my personal life and what I was into. Me being dumb and naive, I tried to be friendly and chat while feeling a bit uncomfortable. After a while, my friends and I would move to different tables, benches, even hallways to avoid him, but he always somehow found me. After about a year of this, my best friend finally told me that if I didn't tell him to fuck off, he would. I really didn't want him around anymore, so sure, go ahead. So one day during lunch, here comes the stalker kid with his signature greeting, barely above a whisper. My buddy just tells him, "Dude, she's not interested, go away." Looking hurt, he shuffles away. I thought he didn't have to be so hard at him, but I thanked him anyways. I didn't see him much around school after that, except for club days where he would just sit across the room and stare at me, while my best friend glared at him. Cut to me being 16 and driving now, minus the awkward club days. I didn't really notice anything from him. That is, until an old gray beat-up car started parking next to me extremely close. One day after school, he was waiting for me in that car. He started asking me how I'd been, what about prom and all that stuff. I was trying to rack my brain on how he knew that was my car, unless he had been watching me before and after school. I started getting there later and leaving later to avoid him, because he was like clockwork. Finally, a boy I used to be friends with in elementary school was walking out with me, and made a comment about how that guy was always next to my car, and asked if he was my boyfriend. I immediately said no, and he's always following me around and that I hated it. It was really starting to freak me out. Bless this guy, because he walked right up to him and scared him off, threatening that if he ever parked near me again that he would kick his ass. I figured maybe that would be enough to keep him away. So again, there was a small space where I would hear nothing of him, except for my friends who had classes with him, telling me about how creepy he was. One friend had art class with him, and said he would draw nothing but naked women constantly in his books. What a classy guy. Junior year was wrapping up, and I started taking my BFF, Phil we'll call him, to and from school. He was on my way, so I figured why not. At some point, Phil started noticing that a little gray car was always heading the same way after school, and made a joke thinking, what if a stalker kid lived next to him? What a small world, right? I could only be so lucky. One day, as per usual, the little gray car was following us, so we took a detour. Sure enough, he was with us every step of the way. It was no longer a joke. We both started freaking out. I pushed the gas pedal as hard as my foot could push it, and noped out of sight. I went home and told my mom everything, because at this point I knew this wasn't normal. She shoved it aside, saying I was probably seeing things. Well, it came time for our end-of-the-year club party. Of course, SK was a senior, so I would never have to see him again. For whatever stupid reason, I offered to host the party thinking he hasn't gone to one yet, so let's celebrate this moment. I was terrified when my dad let him in the door. I don't remember ever giving him an invitation to the party. He spent the whole party talking to me and my dad, being all buddy-buddy with him, asking stuff about me and where my room was. I just wanted to cry and hide. It was all downhill after that. I remember there were days when I would hear a car pull up outside my front door, and my room having a window that saw the front. I would call my buddy Phil and peek to see if it was him. 3 times in 1 month. I just hid under my desk and cried on the phone with Phil. Other events from school would be him asking a girl I played softball with to prom, only to dump her and follow me around all night. This includes to after the prom, where I never saw him in person. Our high school had a radio/TV channel for kids to run, and during prom they would record us going up the stairs and playing around in the gym and after prom for the parents to see their kids having fun. Took one of my friends to point it out, but it showed me playing DDR for a while against my friend Phil, and SK was standing right behind me, watching me for a good 5 minutes. I never even knew. The one that still creeps me out to this day is graduation for his class. Our classes were so big. They did a day and night ceremony where all the students had to attend the day one. I was scanning the crowd to see my friends who were graduating when I saw a hand wave as I passed by. I looked back, and of course it was SK waving at me. How he had picked me out from a crowd of thousands, I'll never know. 2006. Senior year was great. No signs of the creepy SK to the point where I started to forget about him. I graduated and chose a college in town. I got a job at a local retail store and started to move on. Life was beginning to be normal. I work in the gaming department, so you get some weird randos every once in a while. One that I saw a lot was this little Mexican guy with glasses who never purchased anything but would just walk around from time to time. Then, SK comes strolling in the doors and walks into gaming and just talks. I ask how he knew I worked here. He said his friend saw me and knew we were friends. I tried to radio for help over and over for someone to come and get him out. Finally, a big guy from computers walks by and asks for my help in the back. Once he pulls me to safety, I tell him everything. From that point, security was aware and is told to watch out for this guy. Of course, he wasn't doing anything physical, so all they could do for me is to watch out for him. So every time he came in, they would walkie me, and I would dip back to the warehouse. I started seeing his friend, who we called Ninja Friend, constantly, and all he ever did was walk around on his phone. I began to suspect he was texting SK to tell him where I was, because sure enough, 10 minutes later he would come in too. So I tested this theory, and started to randomly walk around the store. At one point, a friend who worked the register asked why I would do this, so I had her take a walk with me on her break. I told her this NF would follow us everywhere, even just going down a random aisle. Sure enough, he did, and she began freaking out. A few minutes later, I told her my stalker would walk through the doors. Sure enough, I'm making my way to the warehouse, and out steps Ninja Friend from an aisle and says, "She's right here." I just stared at him, like, who the hell do you think you are? SK walks up behind me and asks why I'm always running away from him. Oh, and he nosed my number and asked if I can give it to him again. I say, knowing damn good and well I never even gave it to him in the first place, sure. I go to the warehouse and write, "This is where I work. Don't ever come here again," and hand it to him. Glare at his friend, walkie security about him, and sit in the warehouse and break down. Security later tells me that he also cried when they took him out. Later that day, as I'm leaving work, security offers to walk me to my car. This, of course, isn't the rules, but friends caring about friends, so I say sure. SK is out by my car waiting for me, so this is where security says fuck it and calls the police, which we are conveniently next to their headquarters. He books it when he sees the car. A few years go by and nothing comes up. I buy a fancy new car and don't see him around that much. I'm thinking that did the trick and I'm finally free. My buddies and I are leaving work, ready to hit a night at the bar as per usual Thursday deal. We're all walking out the door, where we all have to stand and wait to hear the alarm sound to verify it's armed. As we're walking out, I hear it. That awful sound. Hey! I cringe and grab my friend's arm and turn. There he is, leaning on his car, waiting. My friend recognizes him and asks him what he wants. He says he just wants to talk to me. He didn't ever see my car, so he didn't think I worked here anymore. His other friend is sitting in the back seat of his car just staring at me blankly. I started to think the worst. If my friends leave me here, my gut tells me I'm not coming into work the next day, or ever. I'm terrified that he's had years of time to think about our last encounter, where I wrote my number down and made him cry. I grab my friend's arm tighter. My friend goes off, pretends to be my boyfriend, and rips into him. My friend is about 2 feet taller than him, and much, much bigger. They get into it, and I'm just standing in the parking lot. I'm a terrible person for this, but I'm sure you understand at this point. Thinking, kick his ass. He spooked SK so bad that I'm pretty sure he pissed himself before getting back in his car and booking it. Ever since, if he comes into the store, my friend stares him down from his office, and he leaves. He's never bought anything in all these years. Years later, I've moved on and gotten married, and moved out of town. Recently, we moved back to start a business, and to this day I still feel myself looking behind me at stores, just in case I randomly bump into him. He caused me to have anxiety, mental and emotional pain, fear and trust issues for a decade. Even after moving on, I still feel the effects today, and I never even knew his name. One summer long ago, I worked for a house painting company made of many small franchises, preying on college students for underpaid and overworked employees. Said indentured servants/workforce generally returned to school in late August, and the franchise would close until the next summer. I was a lackey who hired everyone, formed crews, met with customers, transported materials, and the like. AKA my boss's job, but he preferred, not doing it. Late in the summer, my boss decided to continue into the fall months so he could make a bit more money while depriving me even further of the will to live. So I had to hire people who were in the painting business, but for whatever reason couldn't find a job with a reputable company and had no option but to work with us. Yay. Enter Jim. Jim was a veteran, about 45 years old, which was far above my usual 18 to 22 hiring demographic, but he had impressed me over the phone. As I was essentially painting entire houses myself, or with a skeleton crew until I could scrounge up more workers, I didn't interview him in person. I just told him to show up ready to go and to meet me and a crew at a new job site 9 a.m. on Monday. Life happens, as it does, and I had a family emergency that prohibited me from being there on that Monday. Some of my summer workers who didn't go off to school would be there, so I texted them explaining them to help Jim get used to the way we worked, and to make sure to keep it all basic. If he was having trouble, send him home and he'd start over with me there the next day. At 9:45 a.m., my phone is blown up with texts and calls. I'm not awake, but I slip outside to hiss into the phone. I'm staring at a dead family member, and you know this. What do you need? Jim isn't okay. What do you mean? He's fucking insane. He's ruining this person's roof, and he won't listen to us. He keeps screaming at us to shut the fuck up. Well, I thought Jim had a point with the last part, since my crew spent more time talking than painting. But I digress. In their infinite wisdom, my crew stuck this new dude up on the roof to paint a teeny space, which would take about 5 minutes with a brush. Homeboy pulls out a 9-inch roller and goes to town, swooping the thing up and down like a skateboarder on a halfpipe, so the entire black roof area below him is covered in beige paint. I tell them to get him down immediately and send him home. I'll deal with it after the wake. I tell my boss what's going on. He brushes it off, saying that Jim called him to apologize, and to tell him he could bring his cousin, Oscar, a guy who's apparently worked as a painter in a union, to the next job. The boss doesn't consult me at all, says it's fine and I have to deal with it. Oh, great. It's a new job site and a new day. I still hate my life. Oscar isn't in a union, but he did work as a painter for over a decade, until he was put in jail for armed robbery, a jail stint that he was fresh out of as of a week ago. To Oscar's credit, he was very polite, respectful, and deferent. I had asked to speak with him alone before I let him set foot on my job site, and he was completely upfront about his jail time and what led to it, answering any and all questions that I had. I was pretty convinced, and he did do an excellent job. My boss stopped by for the first time in forever, and was also impressed by Oscar. So impressed that he decided Oscar and Jim would take on a job by themselves, a job that was mostly trim work for a family of mom, pop, and 3 daughters, 15, 11, and 7. He also decided that he would take care of all the customer interaction, with the exception of me dropping off the extra tall ladder halfway through, to reach one ridiculously small but very high place. Halfway through the job, about 2 days in, I show up like a good peon, massive ladder in tow. Jim is listening to music, and I see Oscar furtively look at him, then wave to me to keep driving and park around the corner. I love me some drama. I don't care about anything anymore, so I do. Oscar sprints directly to my car, and tells me that Jim has been making the owners and their daughters very uncomfortable, and my boss has been ignoring their calls. Oscar had told them to privately wait until the day I came, and he would make sure that I talked to them to help. I thanked Oscar and told him I would deal with it right then, and requested he hang around and proceed as if everything is fine, just in case I needed his assistance in any capacity. I pulled into the driveway, nodded at Jim, and knocked on the door. I was pulled in almost immediately by a frantic and hot mother. The family was Russian, so I was treated to a deluge of information that I could mostly understand, but the rest made me think Red from OINTB found out that I didn't like her food. Apparently Jim had been very opportunistic about his ladder positions as he worked on the second floor of the house, and they were conveniently always able to see directly into the girls' bedrooms, which he took pictures of on his phone. He also made multiple comments to the girls as they came home from school that were a sizable step over the line of pedophilia. A freaking football field past the line of how you speak to a customer or their kids, period. Massively inappropriate, sexual innuendos, the whole creeper works. I managed to keep myself from melting into the floor, and promised them that this would be dealt with immediately. With that, I walk out to confront Jim. I ask if I can use his phone because mine was dead, and after he hands it over, I find almost 100 pictures of the various bedrooms from every angle possible, even zoomed in. He sees me open the pictures from his position on the ladder and starts flying down, screaming at me. He launches at me, and Oscar puts himself in between us, yelling at Jim to calm down. Jim panics and flees for his car, leaving his phone with me. The police were called, and I handed the phone over. I was interviewed, and poor Oscar almost had a panic attack, but they said they would work with the family and take it from there. Great. I finished the job with Oscar, we get tipped, and the family thanked us for our role in helping them, as they didn't really know how to handle what Jim was doing. Time passes, and I'm home binge-watching TV in the living room. It's about 9 p.m. Light floods the room suddenly, as a car pulls up my neighbor's driveway with its brights on. I don't particularly care, so I continue watching TV. After a few minutes pass, I hear yelling from my neighbor's house. I look out the window, and it's Jim's car in their driveway, because my boss had given him my home address as to where to pick up the checks at the end of each week. He got confrontational, yelling at the neighbors about where I was at, when really all he had to do was turn around to see my idiot slack-jawed face staring out the window about 6 feet away. He then pulled out a handgun and started motioning at the wife. Before I can even register this actually happening, or go grab my own gun, which I would have heroically used to shoot myself in the foot or something, my living room is filled with red and blue lights, as multiple police cars pull up and consequently arrest Jim. Jim had 4 guns in the passenger seat of his car, one of which was an AR-15, and another a shotgun. Apparently, he had only taken out one to wave over his head, leaving the other 3 in the car because he wasn't 100% sure which house was mine. My neighbors are elderly, nosy, and snarky, and call the cops on anything of little to no consequence. They called as soon as his beater car pulled up in their driveway, and their knee-jerk 911 reaction likely saved my life. Let's not meet again, Jim. Also, you suck at painting. When I was 20, I was hospitalized due to immunodeficiency for multiple infections, including one that had to be surgically excised. A lot of crazy stuff happened during that visit, including being misdiagnosed with AIDS and flesh-eating bacteria. And this is at one of the best hospitals in the USA. But this was by far the scariest thing that occurred during my stay. One night, about 3 a.m. I think, one of the nurses came in. I woke up because I had slept a lot that day, and the bright lights in the hall bothered me. It wasn't my normal male nurse, but an older woman, maybe mid to late 40s. I had never seen her before, and she looked very severe. She didn't acknowledge me at all when I greeted her and asked her questions. Just finally said, "Time for your medication," or something like that. I tried to respect that she didn't want to talk and just faced forward again, because it hurt to move. But I noticed that she had a much larger volume syringe than usual. My morphine dose was always given in a 10 to 20 cc syringe, but this thing was huge, like a 100 to 500 cc syringe, and the accuracy couldn't be that good. So I turned my head again and asked, trying to sound friendly and interested, what my dosage was, and if she was sure she had the right person. She ignored me, and I continued, "Because I think maybe normally my dosage is supposed to be a lot lower. Would you mind double checking?" She only said, "Go to sleep. This'll be over soon," injected the medication, and left. I was kind of out of it. I was just so used to all this stuff going on around me that I figured I was mistaken. I tried to go back to sleep, but even before the medication hit me, I felt like something was wrong. I thought about kinking the IV line, which would cause the alarm to go off and forcing the issue, but I just told myself to calm down and try to go back to sleep. They do this for a living after all, and it was probably just the change of nurse that was bothering me. So after a time, I don't really know how much time, I start to feel more genuinely, undeniably weird. First, everything felt hot, or rather, hot on the outside, like I'm radiating heat from the surface of my skin everywhere, but cold on the inside of my skin. Around then, I started to notice that everything had turned a shade of red, and it was all pulsing with what I imagined was my heartbeat. So I'm staring at the ceiling in the dim, and everything I can see is through this red filter, pulsing slightly. I can feel goosebumps on every inch of my body. Then, I feel nothing. I lose all sensation in my skin. I can still feel pressure, but I can't feel anything else, except intricate ripples across my body, as though I'm naked and the window is open, and eventually even these fade. But they're a good example of the mental confusion that set in. For example, after a while I couldn't even tell if my eyes were open or closed, if I was actually seeing, or just thinking I was seeing. When all sensation finally left me, I felt like I was floating 5 feet off the surface of the bed. I realize, as I'm testing my ability to sense things, that I'm having a hard time moving. Moving my hand or arm takes a concentrated effort. At this point, I somehow managed to hit the call button, for which I am later grateful. But nothing feels emergent. The whole thing comes with a warm fuzziness, so I spend a lot of time just playing with trying to move my hands or arms, watching them before I realize that I'm not actually looking at them, but nonetheless, gradually losing my ability to move anything at all. Around the time I can barely move my wrists, not my arms or fingers, I start to feel concern. I realize on some deeper level in the back of my mind that the feeling I have in the pit of my stomach is clenching concern, and that this actually has the potential to be very dangerous. I want to hit the button again, or even call out, but I'm just too tired. My muscles won't move, and now I notice that the pulsing isn't as frequent as it was, though it was only upon reflection later that I fully realized the significance of that. So I kind of mentally slapped myself and set about consciously focusing on breathing in and out. It felt like the nurses never responded for what I would have guessed had been 25 to 35 minutes at least, but suddenly, as if in slow motion, it seemed like a lot of things happened at once. There had been a growing tension in me. If I could have flexed every muscle in my body, I would have been. I was fighting something very hard. And then my nurse came in. My male nurse, whom I had thought was out for the night. The moment I hear the door open coincides with a sudden release of all the heavy mass that had settled over me, like a soft, heavy blanket that wouldn't let me move. And suddenly, I sat up and projectile vomited into the bathroom, next to the nurse who was just walking in. Sorry, I know it's gross, but basically my body collected it and got rid of it. After that, I could finally move, and I could even speak after a few minutes. My nurse seemed relieved to say the least. He cleaned it up and sat next to me and talked for a while. He said that another nurse had been trying to help him and mixed up my dosage, but he didn't seem to want to give much detail. It wasn't until years later that I thought. I was in the terminal ward. I had been out of it for days, clearly in visible pain for some of it. I was the youngest person there by 40 years or so. I wonder if it was just a mistake, or if that woman was an angel of death. Either way, I refused morphine for the rest of my time there, and ever since. I wouldn't accept any of the other painkillers either. This happened a couple of years ago, but I feel like I'm ready to talk about it. In 2016, I had just turned 18 and was in the second semester of community college. I was lucky to get to take a few specialized classes that were requirements for my major. These classes required me to drive about 45 minutes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to the main campus of my community college system. This is relevant because I was going to a town that I barely knew much about, and I didn't know anybody who lived there. There was a man in my class named Eddie. He was a big guy in his late 40s. I'm 5'0", and at the time was about 130 pounds, which is to say I'm pretty small and defenseless. We spent a lot of time in the lab for these classes, and he was stationed right across from me. I was a bit more naive and unsuspecting at the time, and wanted to be nice, so I talked with him and my other classmates quite a bit, and was a lot friendlier to him than I would be nowadays. He started being overly friendly to me, and would stand too close and ask too many personal questions. He'd flirt with me in class, to the point it seemed to make the other people uncomfortable to watch. He also started staring at me a lot, with an intense look that really scared me. Of course, being young and not wanting to hurt his feelings, I decided to try and ignore it as best I could. I told my boyfriend about it, but again, Eddie hadn't actually done anything to me, so there wasn't a lot I felt I could do. A few weeks after that all started, all of us were hanging out in a break room type area, studying for an exam in our next class, which was about 30 minutes away. I was sitting at one table, chatting with some middle-aged woman in my class, and Eddie was at the next table over messing with his phone. I announced that I was going to get something from the vending machine and stood up. As I did, he tried, and failed, to discreetly turn his phone toward me and snapped pictures of me as I walked to the machine, got my drink, and bent over to pick it up. I realized what was going on as I was walking back to my seat, with him still taking photos, and I shot him a dirty look. He put his phone away and just sat there staring at me. I was trying to look pissed, but honestly I was just really freaked out. I excused myself from the table and called my boyfriend, near in tears, telling him what had happened. He was angry, and said that I needed to tell someone, but I said no. I didn't want to make a scene. He tried to comfort me as much as he could, but I had to go to class soon afterwards. Our class finished at about 9 p.m., and since it was January, it was completely dark out when we all walked to our cars. I was actually texting one of my guy friends about what had happened when Eddie walked up to my car. He stopped for a second and looked at me through my windshield, then slowly kept walking, watching me through my driver's side window the whole time. He was parked nowhere near me, and the wind chill was below 0, so he had to have made a point to walk by my car like that. I was terrified, and with my hands shaking, I started my car and drove home as fast as I could, calling my boyfriend on the way and crying. After that, I decided I needed to talk to my professor about what was going on. I was so nervous, but I asked her the next week if I could talk to her privately when class was over. We went to her office, and I told her about Eddie, and what he had done, how he had acted so weird towards me. She told me that she had noticed I tensed up and went quiet whenever he got close to me, and had noticed him paying a lot of attention to me. She told me she believed me about the pictures. It was honestly amazing how she handled it. She promised me that she would move things around where I'd be away from him in the lab, and asked if I wanted her to talk to him about it. I said no, that I didn't want to make him angry, and she said she'd respect that, but she was going to have the security guard stand at the door and watch me go to my car every night, and that she'd tell the program director what was going on, but Eddie wouldn't know that I'd talked to her. And by the time we got done, it had been about 30 minutes since class had ended, and she offered to walk me outside. I'm glad that she did, because when we came out of the elevator to the first floor, Eddie was sitting in the foyer alone. Everybody else had gone home long ago. My blood ran cold, but I tried to act as normal as I could. He seemed as surprised to see our professor there as she was to see him. She asked why he was still here, and he said he noticed my car was still parked out front and wanted to make sure I didn't have to walk out myself. I'm pretty sure I was as pale as a ghost, but my professor gave him a look that I couldn't read and said not to worry. She was walking me to my car, and from now on the security guard would be there every night. He said that was good and quickly left and said good night. It still chills me to think about what would have happened if my professor didn't walk me down to my car that night. I have no idea what he was capable of doing. After this, she rearranged our seating and made sure we were never grouped together, and I started making sure I walked out to my car at the same time as a few other women in my class. The security guard was usually in the foyer, and we only had a couple months left of class, so there wasn't really any time for other incidents, but I still caught him staring at me sometimes, and he looked like he was full of rage. It's been a few years. I don't go to that school anymore, and I'm moving to a completely different city soon. So this was told to me by an old family friend, Nikki, numerous times as a kid growing up, as one of those life advice stories to keep in mind throughout the years. And to her credit, I've never forgotten it. Whenever anything associated with hitchhiking comes up, it always springs to mind, and probably always will. It makes me a bit ill whenever I think about it, actually. So Nikki, who grew up at the same time as my dad, so this was about the early 80s I believe, was a young woman in her mid-20s. She's one of those real kind-hearted souls, always willing to help out another in a time of need, you know? I can't imagine her being anything other than that when she was younger, so I totally see her doing this too. So driving into the city, about a 2-hour or so drive from town, she saw a man walking down the side of the road. As she neared, he turned and, in a typical hitchhiker manner, stuck out the old arm and thumb. Nikki, bless her heart, pulled over and asked him if he needed any help. She told me that he was really polite, if not a bit shy, when he asked for a lift into the city. Nikki gave a smile and popped open the passenger door for the guy, who tossed his bag into the back seat and buckled up for the ride ahead. They talked pleasantly for most of the trip. About friends, the news, happy small talk. She felt like they were getting on really well, and even bought him dinner at the pit stop a little over halfway there. She says he seemed really flustered and awkward when she paid, but one of the things they had talked about was money, and how he was pretty darn strapped for cash. This was supposedly why he was hitchhiking in the first place. But he eventually relented, and they went on their way. As soon as they got into the city, he thanked her profusely for the ride and the food, and asked to be dropped off once they hit downtown. Before getting out, he asked for Nikki's phone number, so he could contact her someday and catch up. Thrilled at the prospect of knowing how her new friend was faring, Nikki wrote it down for him, and drove off with a warm feeling of a good deed done. Now, I'm sorry if you were expecting something creepy to have happened by now, but I think this is what freaked me out so much as a kid. How nice everything seemed to have worked out. Nikki gets this crease in her forehead, and a funny look in her eye when she tells me the next part. How a week later, she got a phone call from her driving buddy. He didn't let her get a word in edgewise after hello, and told her that she should thank God that she was raised so nice, because when he first got into her car, he was planning on raping and murdering her once they got to that pit stop, that he was going to steal that car and dump her body in a ditch further down the road and go on his merry way. But after she talked to him so kindly and treated him to dinner with a smile on her face, he couldn't bring himself to do it. He didn't think that he could live with himself after doing that to such a nice lady, and he told her to please never pick up another hitchhiker. Then, he just hung up the phone. Nikki never received another call from him again. When she tried redialing the number, all she got was a payphone. When I was about 6 years old, my family went on vacation to the beach in Florida. I'm a lot younger than my siblings, so while they were doing their own thing with their friends, I was stuck wherever my mom would take me. For the most part, we stayed in the extremely crowded pool area by our hotel, which had direct access to the beach. It's all a bit hazy, but at some point when I was swimming, I looked up to where my mom was supposed to be sitting, and she wasn't there. I was really attached to her, so I got out and started looking around for her. I scanned all the chairs, took a trip around the bar next to the pool, but I just couldn't find her. For some reason, 6-year-old me decided she'd gone for a walk on the beach without me, so I made my way out there looking for her. I had walked about half a mile down the beach out of the crowds to a more vacant area, and I just remember starting to cry because I thought I'd never see my mom again. Just as I had basically given up, a woman and man came up to me. They asked me who I was, and if I had had any family nearby. I had told them I was alone and looking for my mother. They said to me that they had seen her, and told me that they would hang out until she came back for me. Well, these people took me about 2 miles away from my hotel. We walked down the beach to a more residential area. They kept insisting that my mom was going to be down on the other end of the beach, and that they were going to take care of me. They tried to get me to build sandcastles with them, and even told me that we could leave to go get dinner and they'd bring me back afterwards. I kept telling them no, and that I really wanted to return to my hotel so that I could go up to my room and check for my mother there. And that's when they got really upset with me. And the woman said to me, "We're going to leave. Go get dinner at our house, and we will bring you back to your hotel afterwards. Got it?" I was starting to get really nervous at this point, so I told them I didn't want to go with them, and that I could walk back to my hotel on my own. The man then said, and I will never forget this, "You're coming home with us for dinner." He said it in one of those creepy do it or you'll die tones. I don't know, it just kind of stuck with me. Lucky for me, I heard my name in the distance. There was a group of people yelling for me. I bolted over to them, and they asked me who I was. When I told them my name, they smiled so big and said, "There are lots of people looking for you." When I turned around to tell the group that a man and woman had been hanging out with me, they were gone. The group, which actually ended up being hotel workers, took me back to my hotel where everyone was waiting. There was a fire truck, an ambulance, and news crews all there, because I had been gone for over half the day. The entire hotel pool area had been shut down in efforts to arrange search parties. My mother was sobbing, and all ended up being okay. When I told the hotel workers what had happened, they were extremely concerned. Apparently not even a week before, a child had gone missing in their beach access area. When the kid was found, he claimed a man and woman had lured him out to their car, where they tried to forcibly take him home with them, and that's when he bolted away and found another family for help. I doubt many people may even remember that this place existed, but before the days of Barnes & Noble, the biggest bookstore chain in the country was Crown Books. They discounted every book, and that was the reason why they were able to become so big for so long. However, they closed in 2001. I used to be a manager of a Crown bookstore, actually. It really was the best job I ever had. Sure, it didn't pay that great, but the work itself was very satisfying. I honestly look forward to going into work almost every day. I also worked with some really smart students, and it was a huge change from the previous fast food joints I had been employed in before. Anyway, when the store was in its final throes, there wasn't a lot of money to go around exactly, so every manager worked a shift by themselves. I took a lot of the closing shifts because I was a night owl. I almost always let my employees go home early, and I would be by myself in the store for around an hour or so, just finishing up with the rest of the work. These days, it seems that bookstores always have shelves that people can see over. The Crown store I worked at was not like this. The shelves were all very high, and you literally couldn't tell if there was anyone in the store with you. On the night this happened, I had one of my employees go up and down the aisles and check the bathrooms to make sure there was no one still in the store. When he confirmed this, I let the employees out the door, then made sure the lobby lights were off, and I went into the back room to do the final paperwork of the day. Although I liked being in the store by myself, I had to admit that it was a bit frightening at times. But the back room had one of those combination button locks on it, so I always felt fine back there. I was doing my paperwork when I realized that there was a book that was special ordered that had been shelved. I went out into the store in order to look for it. There were a few security lights in the store, but they honestly didn't provide much illumination. I didn't turn any of the other lights on, because they weren't supposed to be back on after the store closed. The book I was searching for was some sort of diet book, so I went over to the self-help section, which is where we kept those sorts of books. I walked down the first aisle and turned the corner. Checking through the books, I noticed that it wasn't on the shelf. I turned the other corner and then checked on that side to see if the book was misplaced by a shelf or two. I did end up finding it. I then walked up to the front of the store. I cannot convey how creepy this was, walking through this empty store. I don't believe in ghosts, but have often thought that if a ghost existed, a bookstore would be just the right place for him or her to hang out. So, walking around in a dark store with limited view, everything about it just freaked me out. Every little tiny noise caught my attention. Walking around the book stacks, I was happy when I finally made it to the front registers. We kept all special orders right there. I pulled out a slip and began writing. I'm not sure why I did it, but I raised my head up and looked at the security monitor. There were 4 cameras in my store. My blood nearly froze in my veins when I saw that someone was standing in the self-help aisle I had just recently walked out of. It was a giant man, maybe over 6 foot tall and dressed in black, holding some sort of weapon in his hand. I wasn't really sure what to do. I should have just left the store and went and called the police. I didn't want to do it in the store, though, because if the man heard me, he might decide to come after me. I was too stupid to consider doing that. Instead, I thought of the back room and the combination door. The self-help section was on the complete opposite side of the store, so I could probably get to the back room before him. After standing for a moment, I jumped over the counter and began booking it for the back room. It was down a short hallway. I got to the door with no problem. I typed in the 4-digit code and turned the handle. As I did so, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye and saw the man at the end of the hallway. I swung the door open, ran in, and forced it closed. Immediately, I saw the handle jiggling. He was trying to get in. When he realized he couldn't, he started pounding loudly on the door. I wasn't worried about the man getting through. It was made to keep people like this out of the back room. I called the police, and they immediately sent a car over. When they arrived, the man was just leaving the store through the front door, which he must have unlocked himself. They arrested him, and the item he was carrying was a very sharp knife. It took me a very long time to be okay with working alone again. I'm a 28-year-old guy from England. Near the end of August, I was out with some friends in a bar to celebrate my birthday. It was near the end of the night, and we decided it was time to go home, having been out for 8 hours at this point. We were up on the first floor of the bar, and my friends went down the staircase to the main doors ahead of me. For reasons my advanced drunkenness has caused me to forget, I decided to try taking a shortcut off the stage next to the stairs instead. I'm guessing I just stepped off the stage thinking that it was a short drop to the ground, but it was closer to about 5 or 6 feet, and I hit the ground with my legs straight and my knees locked. Snap. I instantly knew something was seriously wrong. Cue a 999 call and a surprisingly calm ambulance ride to the hospital after being dosed up on gas and air. At the hospital, they gave me an x-ray and discovered I'd broken both of my legs. By this point, I had already sort of guessed. Your right foot pointing down instead of up is a pretty good indication, and my heart sank further when the attending doctor told me they'd have to admit me ahead of corrective surgery in the next couple of days. By now, they'd given me quite a bit of morphine, and I was still huffing gas and air like a champ, so I was fairly out of it. A porter wheeled me up to the ward and introduced me to a nurse, who explained I was going to be put into the men's ward, as they'd had to separate genders the previous day into different rooms. I would have thought they'd do this anyway, but whatever. Even out of it on pain meds, I remember thinking it was a pretty weird thing to mention. My nurse set me up in my room, right by the ward entrance. My bed was one of 5 in there, and was next to the room's shared toilet and shower room. It was around 5 a.m., and the entire place was quiet and dark. As the nurse took me through all the admittance procedures, I could vaguely make out a guy in the bed opposite. Unlike the others in the room, he was awake and sitting up in his bed to watch me being brought in. I couldn't see his face, but the patchy white hair on his head was catching the moonlight coming in from the windows, so I guessed he was an older guy. What struck me was how still he was sitting there, almost like a statue. No movement, no noise, nothing. Just sitting there, focused on me the whole time. Before the nurse left, I asked him to draw the curtain around me so I was shielded from view. Eventually, I drifted off to sleep. I woke up the next day to find my parents had been contacted and were sitting by my bed. Standing next to them was the guy from the bed opposite, chatting away like they'd known each other for years. I'm not exactly known as a people person, and given that, for obvious reasons, I was a bit touchy, I'll admit that I was annoyed that my parents were letting a total stranger stand right over me while I was unconscious. Of course, they weren't to know that he'd creeped me out a little the night before. He introduced himself. Here, we'll call him Mick. He seemed friendly enough. One of those harmless old men who comes across as lonely and keen to talk to just about anyone. He was in his early 70s, quite short and round, and was on the ward because he'd fractured his collarbone in a fall. When he eventually wandered off, my parents told me he seemed to be a nice man, confirming that he just appeared pleased to have new people to talk to. During the course of that first day, my parents left, and the doctors came around to fit me up with splints before my surgery, planned for day 3. They made it clear I'd be in the hospital for at least a week, and that I wouldn't be walking for a few months at least. During all these conversations, Mick lurked nearby, listening in. When the doctors left, Mick came to my bedside. Rather than stand, he sat down in the chair next to me and asked me to repeat what the doctors had said. I wasn't in much of a mood to chat, and because I've got it into my head that he was harmless, I asked why he'd need to know since he only stood a few feet away and must have heard everything. The second those words left my lips, his entire demeanor changed. The sweet old man that had been sitting in that chair was gone, and his face went blank, like it had flattened. He fixed me with this weird stare, and one corner of his mouth lifted into a lopsided grin. My wife just died, you know. Again, I'm not a people person, and conversations about death are way outside of my wheelhouse. I stuttered a little, trying to find the appropriate words. I think I went with how sorry I was to hear that, and asked how long it had been. Given the odd grin, I guessed it had been a while. About 3 weeks. Just like that. Gone. His face never changed the whole time. It dawned on me that maybe he wasn't totally mentally present at that point. He never broke eye contact either, just looking at me and grinning. One of those looks that isn't immediately sinister, but then just goes on a little bit too long. Thankfully, the nurses came in at that point to serve dinner, and Mick retreated back to his bed. He watched the TV the rest of the day, and I put my iPod on so I had an excuse not to make any more conversation. Right then, I just thought he was a little left of normal, and it was more weirdness than I could deal with. When the lights out came around, I asked the nurses to draw the curtains around my bed for me. Although I was still quite in a bit of pain, I drifted off early. I woke up in what had to have been the early hours of the morning. One of those gradual awakenings where you know something's not quite right, but you can't work out what. The ward was almost totally dark and silent again, especially around my bed with the curtains drawn. I assumed the weird feeling was down to, being in the hospital with 2 epically shattered legs and turned my head to the left onto the pillow. Then, I nearly rolled off the opposite side in shock. Standing there, inside of the drawn curtain right next to my bed, was Mick. Just stood there, watching me. Like you do when you've had a shock, I said something stupid. "This isn't where you sleep." Nothing. Same blank stare. Same creepy half smile. Barely a ruler length from my face. I thought he might have been sleepwalking, but he didn't have the glazed look to go with it. He seemed perfectly alert, just happy to be stood there observing me. "Mick, how long have you been there?" That's when I got that special kind of chill you get when something really freaks you the fuck out. Rather than reply, he smiled really wide so I saw both rows of his teeth, then shuffled back around the curtain to his own bed. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Because he never really left the room, and I certainly wasn't going anywhere, I didn't mention it to the nurses. I did text a few friends who were visiting the next day, and told them to watch out for him when they came through. He stayed away during their visit, and they said he seemed like a normal old man, which he did at that point. As the day went on, I decided I'd made more of it than I should have, and was just on edge because of what I had going on, being in unfamiliar surroundings and such. That day, I went in for my surgery. I came to about 6 hours later to find myself hooked up to a morphine pump. As a result, I was absolutely out of my tree high the entire evening and was in such a good opiate-fueled mood, I totally forgot about Mick. Big mistake. It got to the early hours again, and I was playing a game on my phone, oblivious. Because nurses were checking me every hour or so, they disturbed the curtains around my bed a lot as they came and went. The last nurse had left a gap about 6 inches wide where the curtains met, typically right in the part opposite Mick's bed. Mick was a very, very loud snorer, and so I was reassured by the noises coming from him that he was very much asleep. I've got to assume because of the morphine, I stopped paying attention, and suddenly realized that I couldn't hear the snoring anymore. I couldn't remember how long it had been since I last heard it. I looked at the gap between the curtains, but couldn't make anything out. I was just about to go back to my game when, from just to the left of the gap, I heard my name being said. Not a normal way of saying it, not a whisper, more of a groan almost. Low and gravelly and menacing. I froze. I mean, what's the protocol when a pensioner has got out of bed in the middle of the night for the second night running to mess with you? I sat paralyzed, with this odd sense of vulnerability. I was immobile. I couldn't really confront him or get up and leave. I was stuck in my bed, heavy bandages and braces around both legs and hooked to an IV. I slowly moved my hand down from my phone to the call button for the nurses. Just as my hand reached it, the long groaning of my name stopped. So did my hand. Had he seen me reach for it and gone back to bed? No, he was still there. About 30 seconds passed, presumably the length of time it took him to be comfortable that I wasn't going to press the button. Then came the heavy breathing. Long, rasping intakes of air, followed by extended groans to expel it. Over and over and over, right at the foot of my bed. That was my limit. I hit the call button and the light went on above my bed. I heard the buzzer sound down the hallway at the nurse's station. There was a burst of movement behind my curtains, and I heard the nearby toilet door quickly open and closed. Not afterwards, a nurse responded to the call. Mick was still in the toilet, but because it was close by, I beckoned the nurse nearer so I could whisper. I told her what had happened and about the previous night, and asked if something could be done. She nodded and said she'd be right back. While she was gone, Mick emerged from the toilet and I heard him climb back into his bed. Thankfully, the nurse had fully closed my curtains, so at least he couldn't see me now. An hour passed and eventually the nurse returned. I was expecting to be moved elsewhere, but instead she told me that I couldn't have a sleeping pill due to being on morphine. I tried my best not to be impolite, and calmly told her that I didn't ask for a pill. I asked for something to be done about what had happened. The last thing I wanted was to deliberately knock myself unconscious with more meds. She sort of shrugged, half explained that all of the wards were full, and disappeared again, telling me to get some rest. I didn't sleep for hours. Mick's snoring eventually resumed, and the day finally caught up with me, so I cautiously allowed myself to drift off. The next morning, everything seemed normal again. Mick made small talk, which I didn't really respond to, and eventually left me alone. That afternoon, a guy younger than me was admitted with a broken leg. This guy was 18, but looked about 12. It was ridiculous. Mick didn't seem to think so, because suddenly this guy was the focus of all his attention. I felt sorry for the fresh meat, but grateful that I might be able to relax now. That night, I slept pretty well, until about 3 a.m. I woke up to a weird sensation on my left foot, the toes of which were poking out at the top of my bandages. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I saw Mick again stood inside of my drawn curtains, playing with my toes, running his fingers along them, pinching them, moving them around, like he'd wanted me to wake up and see what he was doing, but not looking at them, looking me dead in the eyes, unblinking, grinning. I'd like to say that I lost my shit with him, called the nurses in and had him moved elsewhere, but the mind's a weird thing, so I didn't. I just sat open-mouthed and watched him as he kept moving my toes around. I think it was disbelief that kept me quiet, mixed with fear. He might have had more than 40 years on me, but I was trapped in that bed and totally at his mercy, so I didn't want to do anything to piss him off. Eventually he seemed to get tired of messing with me and disappeared behind the curtains back into his own bed. For obvious reasons, I sat awake the rest of the night, watching and waiting for him to show his face again, but he didn't. Every now and then I heard my name being groaned low and long. By morning, I was a mixture of furious and terrified. I'm not the kind of person who assumes the role of victim very often, and so I hated how easily this old man had reduced me to a paranoid wreck. Every time he got up to stretch his legs or get some water, my entire body went rigid, expecting him to come back to my bedside. He didn't, going back to devote all his creepy attention to the new guy again. That afternoon, Mick was called away for a scan, and so I finally had some time to speak to the 3 other guys in the room about what had happened. None of them had any idea about Mick's nightly visits, since they were dosed up on pain meds themselves. One of the guys had been there longer than I had, though, and he had been around when the wards were divided by gender. I asked him what had happened, and he responded that he wasn't totally sure. He just knew that something had happened during the night, and the next morning, men and women were in separate wards. For obvious reasons, I had a pretty good idea of what that something might have been. When Mick got back, he glumly announced that he'd been cleared to go home, and had an ambulance booked to take him there in an hour or 2. He started making his way around the ward, saying goodbye to everyone. He left me until last. You look after those legs in the future. They're fragile things. I half smiled, and because I'm crippled with English politeness, told him I hoped he'd feel better soon. Assuming the interaction was done and I'd finally seen the last of him, I picked up a magazine and started reading. No sooner had I done that, I felt a pressure around my left foot. I looked up and was about to yell out until I saw what Mick was doing. His hand was clamped around my foot, squeezing it so hard that his knuckles had gone white. Thankfully, the break on the left was further up. And that stare was back. Vacant, but intense with a creepy half-smile. Before I could respond, his mouth opened, and out came that same raspy voice I'd heard saying my name in the night. Very, very fragile. He let go of my foot, turned around and shuffled back to his bed to pack. A couple hours after that, he was gone. I did fill the nurses in before I was discharged, but none of them seemed to care all that much, dismissing what I'd experienced as either partly drug-induced or just misinterpreted. This happened about 4 years ago, when I was 16 and a few weeks away from beginning my senior year of high school. My mom and I were taking a trip out to New Jersey to visit my aunt who we hadn't seen in a relatively long time. We arrived early in the afternoon, and we had a pretty great time. It was great catching up with my aunt, and nothing out of the ordinary happened during our first visit. It was around 9 o'clock at night by the time we left my aunt's house, and took about 20 minutes for us to hop onto the turnpike. After about half an hour into our drive, my mom noticed that we only had a quarter tank full of gas left, and decided to stop at the nearest gas station to fill up. We asked the attendant to fill up our tank with $20 worth of gas, and while he was pumping the gas, I asked my mom if I could grab a bottle of water from the store real quick. She said sure and handed me a few dollars. She asked me if I could grab her a pack of gum as well while I was in there, and told me she'd pull into the parking lot on the left side of the store once the attendant was finished. I walked into the store, grabbed everything, and waited in line to be checked out. The line was a little long, so it took about 5 minutes until I paid for everything, and walked out of the store. I turned right and began walking towards the car when I noticed a man standing next to my mom's window, talking to her. All of a sudden, I hear my mom yell at him, "Get the fuck away from me, you sick bastard!" I ran up to the man, got in his face, and yelled, "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" The man was probably in his late 30s. He was wearing a Yankees t-shirt and black shorts. He had very dark brown eyes, jet black hair, and a pretty disheveled mustache to top it all off. He was very sickly looking, and looked a bit thinner than he should have been for his height, to which he was probably about 5'7" and 130 pounds. He began freaking out, apologizing profusely, and saying that it was all a misunderstanding and that he deserved a second chance. I screamed, "Get the fuck out of here before I smash your face against the concrete." He ran off and got back into his black car that was parked on the other side of the lot, and drove off. I got into the car and asked my mom what had gone down while I was in the store. She said the man walked up to her and asked for directions to Jersey City. She answered his question to the best of her abilities, to which he thanked her, and then tried to hit on her. My mom has had creeps try to hit on her before, and she had a feeling this guy was a creep right from the get-go, so she thanked him for the compliment and showed him the wedding ring on her finger, and told him she was already taken. She hoped it would deter him as it usually worked in the past. He started rambling on about how she was in an abusive marriage, and he could tell by the look on her face, and that if she gave him a chance he could treat her right. He also said disgusting things about what he wanted to do to her when they had sex. My mom screamed at him to get away from her, and then cue me walking out of the store and scaring him off. We drove out of the gas station, and eventually put what had happened in the back of our minds. About half an hour into our drive, I looked into the side mirror, and I noticed a car following us. The highway was pretty well lit, so I recognized that it was the car that belonged to the man we had encountered earlier. I tell my mom about it, and she says that she noticed the car following us for the past 10 minutes. She was going to try to get off at the next stop and try to lose him. We get off at the next stop, and quickly begin taking numerous turns down the side blocks, and also sped down them to try and lose the creep following us. He followed without fail for about 5 minutes, until my mom passed an intersection, and the man sped up to try and keep up with us, but was forced to slam on his brakes when the light turned red and cars had already begun passing by. My mom used this opportunity to speed up and turn down another block. She pulled into a McDonald's parking lot and made sure to park behind the building. She turned the car off, and we waited about 10 minutes just to be sure we had lost the creep. I was pretty anxious at this point, and I knew my mother was too, but she managed to stay pretty well composed despite our current predicament. We assumed we had lost him, and my mom turned the car back on and we drove towards the block that would let us get back onto the highway. We turned onto the road, which was well lit, and it was relatively empty save for us and the occasional vehicle passing by. Not even a minute later, we see a car speeding up towards us in the distance, until we see it's the same creep from before. My mom and I were flipping our shit at this point, and we just wanted this fucking crazy man to go away. Our luck must have spiked at that point, because all of a sudden we see red and blue lights flashing in the distance, and a police siren getting louder by the second. A cop must have been hiding somewhere, was about to turn onto the road when they had seen the creep speeding, and proceeded to chase after him. He speeds past us, with the cop following him, presumably trying to evade him. Relieved, we turned back onto the highway and continued our drive home. We were both shaken up quite a bit from what had happened, but we calmed down after a while. We were both just glad we had gotten away from that creepy man, and that nothing bad had happened to either of us. You'll need quite a bit of backstory in order to understand what my mentality was like at this time, and why I allowed myself to be in this situation for as long as I was. I'll try to keep it as brief and as need-to-know as I possibly can. For reference, I'm currently a 20-year-old male, But this story began when I was 14 and a freshman in high school. Throughout almost my entire middle school years, I was severely bullied to a point where I suffered from severe depression, social anxiety, and self-esteem so low that it was probably a negative number. I literally had no friends I hung out with outside of school, and I couldn't seem to go a single day without someone saying or doing something to me. I had absolutely no idea how to stand up for myself properly, nor did I know how to establish boundaries for myself, as I felt like I deserved to be treated like garbage. I would bend over backward to please everyone around me, with no regard for myself whatsoever. I was so starved for friends and positive attention that I would latch on to anyone who was even remotely nice to me, whether they were actually genuine or not. I still suffer from these problems today from time to time, albeit nowhere near as severe. After I graduated middle school, I moved to a completely different area of the city, where I was able to start completely fresh and leave the past behind me. I had hoped my freshman year of high school would bring me the happiness I had yearned for so long, but unfortunately it didn't. My problems continued to get worse as I struggled to make friends. At that point, I didn't care who I was friends with, I just wanted to have somebody. This mentality is what caused this situation in the first place. The bullying was at its worst during my gym class that year. I was being bullied by numerous people in the class and I could never catch a break. Eventually, I found a group of people to talk to in that class that actually seemed to like me. I never hung out with them much outside of school, but they were pretty chill and I enjoyed talking to them during class. During the second half of my freshman year, a few new students made their way into my gym class. One of them quickly became acquainted with my group, which is how I became acquainted with him. For the purposes of this story, I refer to him as Edwin. Edwin gave off an extremely creepy vibe from the moment I first met him, but I largely ignored it, as I was happy to have someone being friendly towards me. We managed to relate to one another pretty well, considering both of us were constantly bullied and had virtually no friends to speak of. We exchanged numbers, and our friendship began. I was so grateful at the time to meet someone who I could be myself around without worrying about being ridiculed. I still want to punch my old self in the face for ignoring the creepy vibe he gave off, as I would soon find out why he did in the first place. Everything was going perfectly fine for about 2 months into our friendship, until we had a conversation that set the creepiness in motion. I forgot how exactly it got brought up, but at some point, he revealed to me that he felt like he was bisexual, as he had feelings for both guys and girls, and was worried about being bullied for it. I told him that there was nothing wrong with being bisexual and that he should just be honest with himself. If some people are gonna give you shit because of it, then they're the kind of people you probably don't want to associate with anyway. He was happy that I didn't shun him for what he told me, and said that I was the best friend he had in school. There was silence for a few seconds, and then he asked, "Do you have feelings for guys too?" I responded by saying I was only ever attracted to girls, and he seemed visibly disappointed by my answer. I quickly changed the topic, and the rest of the class went by uneventful. Now, just to make it clear, I'm not homophobic by any means, and a person's sexual orientation is their business. I knew right there he was hinting that he had feelings for me, and I've had gay guys hit on me in the past, but this was the only time where I was actually creeped out, instead of just being able to laugh it off like I had other times. About 2 weeks later, the stalking started. Now, to put things into perspective, I went to a very large high school that contained about 4,000 students. I lived about a 15 to 20 minute walk away from the school. My apartment was located next to the train station above a store. There were 2 apartments, and I lived in the one located on the 3rd floor. The door that leads to the stairs in the building was located right by the entrance to the parking lot. Edwin's last class was located a few classrooms away from mine, so we would often bump into each other on our way out of the building. Normally, he took the bus home that was located right on the street in front of our school. but one day he told me he was going to take the train from now on, and asked if I could walk with him since I lived right there. I found it strange that he all of a sudden changed his route home with no explanation, but I was happy to oblige. We walked to the train station and parted ways. I walked into my apartment and put my bag in my room. When I went into the living room to watch TV and looked out my window, I saw Edwin standing at the top of the station stairs, staring up at my apartment with a creepy-ass smile. I was extremely uncomfortable and laid down on the couch for a few minutes. I went back to check if he was still there, but thankfully he was gone. The next day I asked him why the hell he was staring at my house and smiling, to which he responded that he wasn't staring at my house and that I was crazy for thinking he would do something like that to me. He gaslighted me, and I fell for it. I dropped the issue after that. He started popping up more often in school. I would see him more frequently in between classes, and he would often walk me to my classes even though it would make him late for his own. One day, I didn't bump into him on my way out of school. Shortly before I got home, he texted me asking me where I was, as he was waiting for me in front of the school. I told him I walked home, and he texted me back saying he was upset that I didn't wait for him. I apologized and felt pretty shitty afterwards, as I felt like I was being a terrible friend. The next day, when I left class, he was waiting right next to the classroom door for me, and would continue to do this whenever he had the chance to leave class early. He began liking and commenting on every single post and picture I had on Facebook. He got annoyed at me one day when he asked me why I didn't respond to his comments on my posts, and I told him I didn't have time to reply to every single one. He even followed me into the store one day when I had to pick up milk. He apparently saw me while waiting on the station platform and just wanted to say hi. One day when we were walking from the train station, he asked me if he could come hang out with me at my place for a bit. My depression was really bad that day, and I just wanted to be alone for a while until my dad got home from work and picking up my sister from school. I made an excuse that I had to leave in a bit, so maybe next time. He got angry and stormed off, and I didn't hear anything from him that whole weekend. On top of all of this, our conversations turned creepy extremely often. One time he told me that he wished he could see the sexy body I had underneath my clothes, and he laughed. I laughed awkwardly, hoping it was just a really bad joke. He even went as far as to slap my ass when I was leaving for my next class. When I asked him why the hell he did that for, he would say, "It's just for fun, dude. We're friends. You can do it to me too if you like." I walked away feeling pretty disgusted. The year ended shortly afterward, and Edwin fell off to the place of the earth. He never texted me again, and whenever I texted him, I never got an answer. I wish I could say I never heard from him again, but that didn't happen. The first day of sophomore year rolls around, and once I reach my math class, I see Edwin is in the same class as me. He gets extremely excited, and I did too. I'm not sure why, but I didn't ask why I hadn't heard from him all summer. Everything was fine for about a month. His creepy antics largely subsided, but then shit started up again. He never bothered to do anything, and kept asking to copy off of me. I was nice and allowed him to do so, thinking it wouldn't continue. It continued for about a month, and I started to get annoyed. One day I told him that I was getting tired of him copying my homework and not bothering to do it. He claimed he was too dumb, and that he would fail the class if I didn't help him. I told him that this would be the last time I'd let him copy my homework, and that he needed to start doing it on his own. He started going on about how I didn't care about him anymore, and asked how I could just let him fail. He started to text me more sporadically, and his mood changed with each text. Sometimes he would simply say, "Hey, what's up?" and our conversation would go by fine. One time he texted me saying I looked like crap, and that I should care more about how I look. Other times he would text me asking why I was ignoring him, and say that when he texted me he deserved an answer. The worst one he sent me was one where he told me that he didn't understand why I didn't want him to come with me to pick up my sister from school, and called me a pedophile. I told him that I was sick, if that was what he actually thought. I ended up making a friend in my history class, who I'll call Sam. Sam and I became fast friends, and I started to hang out with her and her group of friends very often. I told Edwin one day, and he warned me that they were bitches and that I shouldn't trust them. I told him they didn't seem like that to me, and he told me to wait as their true colors would show soon. Once I began making more positive friendships, I realized just how fucked up my one with Edwin was. They even told me numerous times that they thought he was a creep and didn't understand why I hung out with him. Eventually I had enough of his bullshit and general creepiness and began cutting contact with him. I got a new phone with a new number, and I never bothered to give him my new one. And this worked for about a month, until somehow he got a hold of my new number and texted me one day while I was waiting to pick up my sister from school. I can't remember word for word what he said, but I'll try to paraphrase. "So, you find a new group of friends and you couldn't be bothered to keep your old ones? You're such a fucking asshole as always. I've been there for you since day one, and you couldn't even tell me you changed your number? I thought you were different, but I guess not. You're the same as everybody fucking else." I officially stopped being nice to him at this point. I texted him back saying he creeped me out, and that I was tired of him constantly making me feel bad about myself. I told him I was also tired of him constantly hitting on me and making sexual remarks toward me when he knew damn well I didn't like him like that. I told him I knew he was stalking me, and that he needed to leave me alone. He never texted me back after that, and I blocked his number later that day. He didn't speak to me at school, and I rarely saw him outside of our math class. I had hoped that was the end of it. Of course, it wasn't. It was 1 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, and I was in my room playing Left 4 Dead with my friends. I was the only one awake in the house, when I get a random text from a number that says, "I'm here." I texted the person that they had the wrong number, and the number calls me and I answer. "Hello?" "No, I don't have the wrong number. Get the fuck outside. I want to talk to you. I'm across the street." It was Edwin. I was absolutely livid, and I responded by saying, "You're at my fucking house? Go away. I told you to leave me alone." I told him that I was calling the cops, and he sounded extremely nervous on the phone and begged me not to. I picked up the landline and started dialing 911 when he finally screamed that he was leaving and hung up. I heard someone running outside and assumed it was him running away from my house. I finally broke down and told my parents what had been going on. They told me to report him to the dean on Monday and that they would help me take care of this creep. Edwin was told to stay away from me in school and to never attempt to contact me again. He broke down crying in the room, but I didn't give two shits. He was placed on the other side of the room in our math class, and luckily we never had a class together again after sophomore year. I managed to avoid him throughout the rest of high school, and I only ever saw him once outside of school. It was near the end of senior year, and I was meeting my friends at the food court in the mall to hang out, when I saw Edwin walk by with a group of girls. He just walked by and talked to me like we were best friends. I shot him a dirty look and didn't say anything as I passed by. I still blame myself for everything that took place. I should have listened to my gut when it told me to stay away from Edwin, and I should have told someone earlier about all the problems I was having, as things might have turned out differently. I was so desperate for a friend that I kept him around and let him run right over me. I was so scared of being judged that I never told anyone what was going on for the longest time. I know there were so many things I did wrong during that time in my life that I regret now, but it's all in the past, and luckily I'm not the same person I was at that time. Hey y'all, long-time lurker, first-time poster. I thought I would share my encounter with the creep I met at the end of my trip back home to Arizona. For a little backstory, I went to visit my best friend who had moved from Arizona to California. It was fun, until the end, where we got into a fight resulting in cutting the trip a day short. The morning of, I packed my stuff and took an Uber to the Greyhound and exchanged my ticket for a ride that day. However, the next bus didn't leave until 4 p.m., and it was probably around 10:30 a.m. I was so upset about my fight with my friend the night before that this 5.5-hour wait was just a little cherry on top of it all. I ended up going to a small grocery store and getting a few apples for the trip, then heading back and waiting at the gate where my bus would arrive. And that's where I met Jeremy. He was sitting on the phone talking real loud, and I couldn't help but observe him. He was a mid-30-year-old bald guy with a mustache, wearing a wife beater, dickies, crew socks, and a baby blue bandana he kept rearranging. He tied it to his neck, hang it out of his pocket, or simply wrap it around his wrists. I know you're not supposed to judge, but I just kind of knew to keep my distance from this guy just in case. So here I am opening my bag looking for an apple, when he looks over at me and asks if I'm hungry. I respond, "Oh, no thanks, I'm actually just looking for my apple." He says, "I have plenty of candy I don't even really want. Here, just take some." He hands me some Snickers and Laffy Taffies and stuff. I knew right away that this was a little weird, so I put them in my backpack for later. I was just planning on throwing them away when he wasn't looking. 4 p.m. arrives, and so does our bus. We get in, and the bus driver lets us know that we needed to stop in another city nearby to switch buses, so we all get off, and I head to the line where the new bus is going to be. Jeremy flags me down and says, "Hey, I saved you a spot." I say back, "Oh, it's okay, thanks." These two little old Asian ladies are sitting near him, thanking him for saving them a spot, and talking to him like they knew him and he was just as friendly. He kept on insisting that I come over there. I thought, let's not cause a scene. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? I go over and thank him and wait for the bus, and he says, "Do you have $1 by chance?" I gave him one, and he goes and grabs a Coke and comes back with it. "For you," he said, and handed it to me. I was clearly confused before he said, "You look like you could use it." I was a little put off, but not too bad. Once the bus started loading us in, I sat down and he came and sat right beside me and said, "Lucky we got seats next to each other." He took out his laptop and put some headphones in. Oh, good, I'll be left alone, I thought. Wrong. "Here, grab the other headphone so we can watch a movie together." Obviously I declined, but he kept insisting, even though the internet wasn't working on that bus, so we couldn't play a movie anyways. So he resorted to trying to talk. He asked a lot of questions about me and if I had a boyfriend. I did, and he asked if we were ever going to get married. That was where I finally got put off, but also tried to be engaging enough to not piss him off, because they don't check your luggage at the Greyhound, and I didn't want to know what he had toting around in his big bags. That sounds bad, but I was just trying to be safe. Then he starts telling me he was in California taking care of his sick dad, and that he was heading to Texas to see his estranged wife and kids. He told me about how much he missed them, and how he couldn't wait to go back home and be a part of their lives again. While he's saying this, he's toying with a little piece of paper he took out of his pocket in his hands, and I glanced over at it without even thinking. He lifts up the paper and says, "Oh yeah, I met a lady, very nice, Filipino. We had a very good time last night and she gave me some drinks from her homeland for my trip. You want one?" I shook my head no, but he tried to give me one anyways. It was sort of like a Jumex, a canned fruit drink, and I told him it was okay, but he grabbed himself one too and said cheers. Then he started going on about this lady and asking me for advice. Should I call her, or do you think that would make my wife mad? I stared at the drink, thinking how could I get out of the bus, and he says, "Well, aren't you going to drink it?" I opened the can and took a fake sip, and said it was really good or something along those lines. Then he smiled at me. When he smiled, I was disgustingly uneasy. His teeth were dark yellow and partially black, very, very crooked teeth, and plaque for days. I mean layers of this stuff all over his mouth. I worked in a dental office, mind you, and those teeth were amongst the most disgusting I've ever seen. Not to mention he reeked of vomit and cigarettes. I wanted to throw up, and instantly wanted to leave, but it was a packed bus in the middle of the desert, and no security, so I thought, for now, I won't do anything. He started asking me if I go to church, and told me he had a very special book for me. He handed me some children's Jesus sing-along book, and told me it was very dear to him and he wanted me to keep it. I took it and thanked him. I was being short with him at this point because I wanted to avoid his breath, which was nauseating. Cut to many stops later, around 10 or 11. Everyone starts falling asleep, and so does he, but he falls asleep with his legs wide open, and they were rubbing up against my thigh, so I sat with my chin to knees, sobbing softly so he wouldn't hear me. I was so uncomfortable and scared because I didn't know what kind of person he was, and I couldn't sit anywhere else because the bus was full. The lights were dim on the bus too, so nobody saw me, but I wish somebody could. I cried for maybe an hour before he woke up and started trying to rest his head on my shoulder. He started mumbling beautiful and sexy, and I thought I was hearing wrong, but I still texted my boyfriend, telling him about the creep and what I thought I heard him say. My boyfriend told me maybe I was overreacting, but I would be home soon nonetheless. While I'm texting my boyfriend, I noticed Jeremy glancing over at my phone a lot, and kind of saw what was coming, so I opened my maps to check and see how long the ride was till I got home. Jeremy mumbles what I knew he would. "Who are you texting? Let me see." I show him my Maps app, and told him I was just checking to see where we were at. So then Jeremy sits up and starts mumbling again, but a little clearer. "You're so pretty. You're a very pretty girl, you know that?" And he touches my thigh. I was shook, to say the least. All I could manage to say was, "Why are you doing this?" "Because you're so sexy. You're just so pretty." He said this while opening his legs more and more. At this point, I don't even hide it. I just clearly text my boyfriend panicking, and Jeremy says, "Let me see your phone, little girl." I ignore his demand, and then he let his head fall on my shoulder. I pushed it off, and he kept mumbling like he was falling back asleep. The bus driver later stopped and told us we were at a gas station if anyone needed anything. Jeremy is awake now, and pretending like 1 hour ago didn't even happen. He hands me a $100 bill and told me to get us some snacks. I told him I was fine, and he said, "Okay, I'll get us some honey buns and drinks," and gets out. This was my chance. I grab all my stuff and head to the bus driver and told him what happened, but he said he couldn't do anything because he didn't technically do anything to me and just freaked me out. The bus driver suggested I sit with someone else in the meantime. I looked for the friendliest face I could before I see this really nice looking guy. Looks a lot like my favorite uncle, so I took solace in him. I didn't even realize I was crying until I tried explaining to him the situation, as brief as possible, and he understood enough through the panic and told me to sit near the window and he would cover for me. I look in the reflection of the bus window to see Jeremy get on and head towards the back. He notices I wasn't there and started looking around frantically. "Melanie? Melanie?" And the doors close, and the bus driver starts back on the road. The new person I'm sitting next to begins to tell me he thought we were riding together, as did all the other passengers. They all thought he was either my uncle or just a creepy-looking life partner. I cried so hard when he said that, because I told him I felt helpless, and nobody seemed to care. He just comforted me and told me I would be gone and away from this all soon enough, and he was right. By the time I got to my station, it was 4:20 a.m., and I breathed a sigh of relief. My boyfriend picked me up, and I told him what happened, but we never saw that guy again. Okay, for some very short backstory, I became homeless at 16, and through some help I found a place for people between 16 and 25. They gave me a house to stay in, until I could find myself a permanent place to live. I was put in a rough area close to the center, where I could get help and so on. This is the first of many stories of my roommates at Rush. The first one was my first ever roommate. The house was shared with the exception of the bedrooms, which had fireproof doors with locks on them. My room was the larger of the two, and the smaller room was where my roommate lived. The first day of her moving in, our houseworker comes around and introduces me to Holly. Holly was a large girl who was about 22 to 24 at the time, and played the sweet, "Aw, you're only 16? Bless you," kind of role. She said she would look after me to the worker. I smiled and did it all back, but I already had the feeling she wasn't someone I wanted to look after me at all. She just had a creepy feel, like she was too over-the-top sweet and trying to hide something. After the little intro, we never really spoke a lot. When I was downstairs, she stayed upstairs, and when I went into my room, she went downstairs. It didn't bother me since Friday to Sunday she was out getting wasted, so I pretty much had the house to myself. One day, I'm sat downstairs watching a bit of Jezekyle to make myself feel a bit better. I was in, and I hear her stomping downstairs. She opens the door quickly and tries to make some small talk. You know, where are you from? Why did you leave? Blah blah blah, that kind of stuff. After about 10 minutes of her talking about ex-boyfriends and intimate shit I didn't care for, she comes out with, "Are you a virgin?" I stared at her for a good 5 seconds and reply, "That's a pretty fucked up question to ask a 16-year-old. She just sort of laughed it off. "We're both girls here. What does it matter?" I get up and tell her that I'm not really into girly chats. She stands up out of the way, and I nope it back to my room, thinking, thank the Lord it's Friday. Fast forward to about 1 a.m., where I was sat in bed reading a magazine, where the front door bangs, followed by, "Shit! Shh! Come into the living room." At this point, I'm just thinking, for fuck's sake, there goes my Saturday morning of chilling in the house. Suddenly, though, I hear hushed and fast talking. I stay quiet on the bed, listening, when a man's voice replies to the whisper. "I'm not paying $300 if you don't know, and it's $150 if it's a no." His foreign accent sounds pissed, to say the least, but Holly becomes equally irritated too. I asked, but she didn't say yes or no, which probably means yes. She only just turned 16. A second man chimes in with the same accent, but a more serious tone. So she is 16. I hear Holly stand up. "Yes, now give me the $300 or fuck off. No skin off my nose, there are others out there." As soon as he said 16, I knew he was talking about me. My heart hit the floor and I sat frozen on my bed, praying that I had locked my bedroom door. I heard her heavy footsteps slowly come up the stairs, and every step up I felt a cold chill. "Hey, you awake?" she slurred. She did a pretty good impression of being wrecked, but I stayed silent, hoping she thought I'd gone out. "Hello?" The handle wobbled, but like a fucking idiot, my door wasn't locked, and it came open. I don't think I've ever thrown myself out of bed so fast in my life. I slammed that door hard enough that she fell back into the hall. I thanked Rush for making my side of my door have a twist lock, and laid myself flat against the door. She tried to play it off cool. "Oh, shit, sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. I was just checking in on you." Now, my teen angst got the better of me, so I said as confident as I could back, "Go away, and take whoever the hell you're with away, too." By this point, she realized I knew shit was going down, and she started banging her fist on my door, screaming and shouting for me to open up. She started almost begging when the two guys came charging up the stairs, and the second man took on the most soothing tone he could. "Hey, we just want to talk about something. That's all. Holly is really upset, and we need your help." "Fuck off or I'll call the police," is all I could muster back. "With what phone?" Holly laughed, scoffing, and the guys let out a quick laugh too. One of them leant against the door on the other side, and without wavering stated, "If you open the door, it will be better than if you don't, and we have to kick it down." I didn't have a witty comeback or even the strength to say no. I was 16, and if they got in, I didn't stand a chance. Both the guys set off in what I guess was their native tongue. A minute passed of this, until I was caught off guard by blow after blow on my door. I backed away, and the door made a noise which indicated that it couldn't take 2 guys kicking it in. I scanned around the room frantically as I dashed to the other side, looking for my window keys. I grabbed them from my jeans and fumbled with the window, and screamed like I've never screamed before. They stopped banging and realized I wasn't worth the jail time, I guess, and me screaming like that is going to have everyone opening up their front doors to nosy at what's happening. I hear the stampede down the stairs, and the back door swings open and then slams shut. I stopped screaming and slid down the wall into a little ball. I have no idea how long I was sat there, just thinking in what-ifs, and I didn't stop what-ifing until the sun came up. I ran downstairs, chained and bolted the front and back doors, and then hid away for a week. Holly and the 2 men never came back. She didn't leave anything behind except clothes, and I didn't tell the Rush house what happened until they came around on a house check and saw the fate of my door. By then, it had already been a month, and now that I'm older, I wonder what the fuck they've been doing since. Long story short, the only reason my new roommate wanted to know so much about me and be friendly was so she could sell me for sex to 2 blokes. Okay, so years of watching and reading about true crime has led me to be extra cautious and always on the lookout for people who are out of place or acting odd. I believe this has saved me from several bad encounters, and this is probably the worst of them. I was a junior in college at a local university that's located in the city. The campus is about a mile wide, and I lived a little over a mile from it. I lived in an apartment building that was owned by the university, so only students lived there. It was known as the poor kids' apartments, and was the farthest from campus, in a bad part of town. The apartments had recently had issues with break-ins, so I was extra cautious about who I held the door open for. The door to the elevators was one that was locked when it was closed, and only people who lived there had keys. Sometimes, though, people held the door to save you from needing to find your key. It was about 6 p.m. one night, and I was just getting back from class. I had planned on just stopping at my apartment and then leaving to drive to my mom's house for the weekend. I worked about 40 minutes away, near my mom's house, so I tended to stay there almost all weekends. As I was approaching the elevator door, I noticed that someone was holding it open for a group of us. As I was walking to the elevator, though, I noticed that one of the people he held it open for didn't appear to be a college student. Not only was he much older, late 30s or early 40s, but he looked homeless, for lack of better words. He was dirty and wearing dirty clothes. He obviously stood out to me, but apparently not to the other people in the elevator, because no one really watched him except for me. I watched to see what floor he pushed when he walked in, but he never pushed a button. Big red flag. I was on the top floor and was one of the last people to enter, and I noticed that I was the only one to push the button for that floor. Fuck, if this guy doesn't get out on the lower floor, he might be up to something. As the doors open and people get out, I noticed that he's looking at me and not getting off at any of the other floors. And before long, it's just me and him. I have to think fast because the fact that he didn't press my floor but entered before me and the fact that he appeared out of place were both huge red flags. I decided I would let him get out of the elevator first because he would have the choice of left or right, and if he chose left, I could run right and get to my door. I got my key ready and let him out. He hesitated for a second, and I pretended to be looking for something in my purse. He got out and went left, which was awesome. I go right into my apartment, which was located close to the elevator. I glance left as I'm walking in, and see him just standing in front of one of the doors, looking at me. I get into my room and lock the door right away, and I grab the few things I need and keep thinking about how fucking weird the situation was. I start to think that maybe he was just dating someone in one of the apartments, and I try to rationalize his behavior, but I knew it was just weird. I grab my things and head back out. I get back in the elevator and take it down to the lobby. I go to get out, and who do I see getting in with a group of new people? That same guy. What the fuck? Okay, so now I'm sure he's up to something. He sees me, and his eyes get big. I go to pull out my phone because I knew I had to do something. I'm about to call the cops while walking out of the lobby, and I run into the security guard who watches our building after a certain time. I tell him everything. He decides to contact the police and have them waiting when he gets back down. He said he would go up and try to find him. He tells me I did the right thing. I still felt bad that someone else could have potentially been in danger. I just hoped that he was only a thief and not some sort of rapist or murderer. I didn't hear anything else about it, and never ran into that same security guard again, so I can't say what happened for sure. I luckily caught a good look at him, so I hope my description helped, but he might have known I was going to do something, and aborted his mission before he got caught. Either way, I always tell people to watch out for stuff like that. Stuff that we always call red flags in here. As a brief introduction for some background on how this happened, allow me to say I'm an old school metalhead. I travel around my tri-state area to see various heavy metal shows. The town I live in is a pretty small town, with no real musical scene outside of hip-hop and pop music. No venue here has anything I'd like to pay money to see. As such, I'm forced to travel at least an hour or so away to see any shows I'd like to see. This often has me traveling with my wife, my favorite concert buddy, usually clear across the state to see concerts. There's a particular venue we love to frequent, but it's a good 3 to 3.5 hour drive away. But it always has great metal acts playing there, many coming in from Europe. When we go to this place, we usually stay in a hotel/casino that's about 3 or 4 blocks away from the venue. It's a pretty short walk. This particular night, we just finished seeing Dark Tranquillity, a Swedish melodic death metal band. It was about 2 a.m. when we got out of the venue, as we'd stay behind for a little bit afterwards, hoping to meet either Dark Tranquillity or some of the opening bands, as often happens in small venues like this. And we did, so it was a little while after the show before we got out of there. So we leave and begin to make the walk back to the hotel. There are tons of fellow metalheads milling out as well, and it's kind of a general idea for many of us to stay in the same hotel, since it's right around the corner. Like I said, just a few blocks over. So we're all kind of walking in this large mob. Now, if you're into the heavy metal scene and frequent live shows, you'll know that it's a fairly tight-knit community. We're all there for the same reason, so everyone is usually pretty friendly and talkative, discussing the show, past shows, meeting band members, etc. Lots of pretty jovial discussion. I'd had to piss for over an hour at this point, but hadn't wanted to dip into the restroom during the end of the band's show, and afterward, the restroom was packed with a line flowing out into the back door. At this point though, it's hitting me pretty hard, as I'd also had a few drinks in the club. So rather than wait till we get back to our room, I decided I needed to stop at the public restroom down at the bottom of the parking garage and take a piss. It needed to happen. My wife doesn't mind, as she said she needed to piss anyway herself, so we split off. I come into the restroom and think I'm by myself, so I hit the first urinal there and start to have at it. As I'm about to finish up, the door creaks open, and this large, bald fellow comes in. He stops dead in his tracks right in front of the door for a moment, takes me in, like he didn't expect anyone else to be in there. Then, he goes to the sink, as I'm doing the same to start washing his face. I'm washing my hands, and he looks over at me with water running off his nose, and asks what I'm doing out here so late. I just explain that I'm coming back from a concert without looking at him. He then starts to ask what kind of music, and I explain to him that it was a heavy metal concert. He kind of shrugs and nods, and just says, "Cool." I'm finished up and drying my hands now, and he turns around and grabs my upper arm lightly, and says, "Hey, then maybe you're interested in buying something I have?" He starts to rifle through his jean pockets, and mumbles out it's there somewhere. I try to politely tell him I'm not interested, and need to get back out. He sort of shuffles in front of me quickly, semi-blocking the door. He looks pretty angry at this point, jutting out his shoulders. He's probably a good foot taller than me. I'm a fairly short guy, so this isn't really hard to do, but still. He says, "Look, man, no need to be rude. Don't be a dick." I again decline, trying to stay polite. At this point, I'm starting to tense up, anticipating a scuffle. The problem is, I'm fucking exhausted. I just spent the better part of 3 hours jumping around and smashing my body into other people. Quite frankly, I'm already ready to collapse. The guy grabs my arm again, this time a little harder, and goes, "Hey man, I'm fucking talking to you." My sense of trying to be reasonable has left me at this point, as I'm too tired to give a shit anymore. Knowing I shouldn't, I tell him, "Man, you're the one being a fucking asshole. I'm tired and just trying to get the fuck out of here, so move out of my way." He shoves me, not really too hard, but from the chest, and steps closer to close the gap, saying, "I was trying to be nice." "Fuck you, you trying to start shit with me?" It runs through my head that while I almost always have my pocket knife on me, I'm completely unarmed, because I knew I couldn't bring the knife with me into the venue club through their security. So I'm preparing for the worst, as the guy seems hopped up on something, is a good deal bigger than me, and I'm in about zero shape to fight. It's about to get hairy, and this guy's blocking my way to the door. Just as I'm thinking this, the door creaks again, and I hear laughter and talking start to flood in. The guy lets go of my arm, and turns around to look as a group of 5 guys in black shirts, studded leather jackets adorned with dozens of band logo patches, and jeans, strolls into the restroom. One of them is a Hispanic fellow with long curly dark hair. He sees me and waves, and exclaims, "Hey, dude, what's up? That was a sick fucking show tonight, wasn't it?" One of his friends, another Hispanic guy with a shaved head, I think took in what might have been going on there, and says, "Hey, this guy giving you shit, man?" I look back to my bald assailant. A worried look has crossed over his features. Even being a pretty big guy, he realizes he's now got 5 guys at his back, a few of them as big as him too, and they're all pretty decked out. They probably look pretty intimidating to the average person not at a metal concert. He glances at me for a split second before saying, "No, we were just talking." I interject quickly, fed up with this jackass. "And now we're done talking. Get the fuck out of my way. Next time, don't be such a dickhead." And start to barge past him, pushing him aside. The Hispanic dude with the long hair turns back to me as I'm passing, and says, "Hey, have a good night, man." I meet up with my wife, who decided to stay outside for a smoke. She asked what took so long, joking that I had to take a huge shit, before I tell her about it, as we're going up the elevator into the hotel. We decide to stop in at the in-hotel bar and grill before returning to our room as we're both kind of hungry. After ordering, we're standing by the counter for a few minutes, and I hear laughter and loud voices coming from the lobby. We turn around, and the same group of 5 guys is coming our way back towards the snack shop. There's the bald guy laying on the ground and being handcuffed with 2 police officers over him. One of them has his taser in hand, and its line is connected to the guy's side. He starts to tell me that apparently the guy had stuck around in the restroom as they'd left, and one of them went over to a parked police car a few aisles over in the garage after noticing there was an officer in it. They told him some guy was on something in there, and that he'd been acting threatening and kind of shady. Apparently, the officer and his partner had decided to step inside the restroom and take a look. As the guys from the concert were going up the elevator to the hotel lobby, they'd heard them shouting, and looked down to see the guy being dragged out of the restroom by both officers. I guess he'd resisted or something, because apparently there had been a scuffle before one of them tasered him, and then, as we all saw now, he was getting cuffed and dragged into the police car. We had a good laugh about it, and talked while we waited on our food. Nice guys. I connected with one of them on Facebook, and we still laugh about that bald guy on occasion. It was the first time Seattle had ever been in the Super Bowl. The year was 2005. The only reason I remember this is because I remember the loud cheers that surrounded my friend and I as we were out in the woods, unsure if we would ever be able to escape the dark forest alive. At the time, the cheers sounded more like screams. Let me explain. I was a 14-year-old girl who loved skateboarding with her best friend. We were little petite punk girls who loved to explore and skateboard. My friend was over at my house, but everyone there was transfixed by the football game. The whole neighborhood was filled with the noises of people cheering on the Seahawks. It was, and still is, a safe and normally quiet upper-middle-class neighborhood. It was around maybe 7 or 8 p.m., but by this point, it was very dark. Not pitch black, but that deepest, darkest blue that remains until midnight. My friend had cigarettes, and we decided we were going to sneak away and skateboard to the forest, down the street, to smoke and hang out in the woods. The woods were a long stretch of forest that rested in the middle of our neighborhood. On each side, steep slopes ran upward and backed into the fences of people's houses. Everyone called it a green belt because the only entrance was at the beginning, and the only exit was at the other end. It felt like you were in a valley of sorts, surrounded by trees and houses far above. All of the neighborhood kids explored it, and it wasn't uncommon to find hidden trails that led toward makeshift forts. Anyway, we arrived at the forest, and walked until we found a clearing far enough away from the entrance that the adults couldn't see us smoking. At the time, we didn't realize this, but almost every single adult was inside watching the Super Bowl. It felt safe there in the dark, smoking and laughing with my friend, because we could hear cheers echoing from nearby houses. We had enough cigarettes to each have our own, but we liked sharing one at a time and passing it back and forth. It made us feel connected and cool. We were sharing our second cigarette, which was in between my fingers. I remember my friend laughing and trying to grab it from me. All of a sudden, she stopped laughing. Her eyes grew wide, and she slowly pointed behind me. "Not going to work, Jess." I thought she was trying to make me look away so she could grab the cigarette out of my hand. I could barely hear her whisper over the cheers that echoed through the forest. "I am not joking." I turned around and looked behind me, my eyes squinting in the dark. I didn't see anything until I looked at the top of the slope. The top of the slope, which ran about 50 feet up, wasn't that far from us. There, a man was standing, watching us. The woods were almost always empty, except for the occasional kid or teenager. Adults just used the woods as a place to dump yard clippings and old compost stuff. He was wearing all black and had on a ski cap, his hands deeply shoved into his pockets. I remember thinking he was very tall, though I couldn't see his facial features very well. I waved at him, wondering how long he had been standing there. It struck me that he may have been there for the whole time. I hoped it was a neighbor. I waited for him to yell at us for smoking, threatened to tell my parents, anything. He didn't wave back. He didn't make a sound. "Hello?" I choked out. The man didn't respond. His hands remained in his pockets, the dim light from a distant back porch behind him illuminating him ever so slightly. I whispered to my friend, "Jess, what do we do?" The man took his hands out of his pockets. He had gloves on, but not gardening gloves. He walked one step down the slope towards us. I could hear the sound of the leaves crunching beneath him. He stood still again, watching, waiting. More cheers erupted in the distance. The cheers that sounded so comforting less than half an hour ago now sounded foreboding. "I don't know," I whispered. "If we scream, no one would even be able to hear us. Everyone's screaming right now." Tears began to pool in her eyes. I had never seen her cry, and I had known her for 9 years by this point. I decided that I had to think, and fast. The man took another step. "What?" I screamed. "What do you want from us?" He began to pull his ski cap down. It was then we realized it wasn't a ski cap, but rather a ski mask. I yelled at her, "Run! Grab your skateboard!" At the time, I was thinking we could hit him with our skateboard if he tried anything. Probably silly, being as we each only weighed about 100 pounds or less. We got up and began running out of the woods. Like a horror movie, the man simply walked at a fast pace after us. I guess we weren't running very fast, because we were each holding a skateboard. Once we got out of the woods, it was all uphill toward my house. The man was a house length's distance or so behind us. His mask was pulled up again at this point. I wanted to ring a neighbor's doorbell, yell, anything, but we were so scared. Scared no one could hear us. Scared that if we ran to a neighbor's house that they wouldn't be home. We ran as fast as we could up that dang hill. We were about 3 houses away from my home when the man behind us just stopped. We kept running anyway, and we made it back to my house, breathing heavily and covered in dirt from running through the forest. What exactly had just happened? "Girls, there you are!" I thought my dad was angry that we had left without asking. Instead, he just sighed and said, "Well, the Seahawks just lost the Super Bowl." It's taken me a long time to tell this story. I'm 27 years old now, and this happened to me when I was 14. My name is Adam, and I have one older brother named Seth. I haven't seen Seth in 13 years. I have no idea where he is or even if he's still alive, but I do know why he left. Seth was 2 years older than me, and we were very close. Although all brothers tend to get into scuffles with one another, with Seth and I, they were few and very far between. For the most part, he and I did everything together. He taught me how to fish, he let me play football and baseball with him and his older friends. Although Seth was bigger and stronger than I was, he always sold me to other people like I was superior to him. He told people I was smarter than him. He told them that I was the talented brother, who was going to be so much more successful than anyone could dream of. I really loved him. and he easily was the best friend I've ever had. Around the time I turned 14, however, Seth began acting very odd. At first, I don't think my parents thought too much about it. He was wearing black all the time and seemed like he was really depressed. Rather than hanging out with me or even with his friends, he took to spending a lot of time alone in his bedroom. He obviously kept the lights off all the time as well, because there was never any light coming from underneath the door. It may have seemed like typical 16-year-old boy sorts of stuff, and that's likely why my parents didn't pay it any mind. But I was a lot closer to Seth than they were. I knew him better than they did, and I knew that this was not typical teenage stuff. Hell, I was a teenager at the time, and going through a lot of that myself. With Seth, it was something more. I would always walk by his room at night, and I would hear him talking to someone. I never heard another voice. I always chalked it up to the fact that he must have been talking on his cell phone. But the conversations were never pleasant. Whoever he was talking to, Seth was always at odds with that person. Whatever it was that was bothering my brother, he never told me. He was never angry with me either. He would say hello if I greeted him, and always offered me a friendly, if not extremely worn-out smile. But rather than do anything else or say anything else to me, Seth would immediately go into his room, lock himself in there, and I wouldn't see him again for the rest of the day. After a couple of months of this strange behavior, and with no signs of it stopping anytime soon, I was sitting at my computer doing some homework. I was having a difficult time with it, so I decided to take a break and chat with some friends on Yahoo Messenger. This was a long time before the days when Skype and Facebook were the norm. I got a message from an unknown user. I don't feel comfortable sharing the real name, so I'll just call it Yahoo Stranger 1. This person sent me a message telling me, "If you don't keep very far away from Seth, I'm going to kill you." At first, I was too alarmed to say anything, but after I composed myself, I messaged this person back. I told him that Seth was both my brother and my best friend, and I would hang out with him whenever I pleased. The person didn't respond. I kept sending them messages, asking who he was, but he only responded, "You've been warned." I wanted to confront Seth about this, but he refused to talk about it. When I mentioned the message to him, there was a little bit of recognition in his eyes, but he forced a very weary smile, tousled my hair, and told me there was nothing to worry about. He would take care of it. That was the very last time I ever saw my brother. The following day, he didn't come out of his room to go to school. I went up and knocked on his door at my mom's request, but he didn't answer. My parents tried to get him out of his room as well, but the door was locked and there was still no answer. My parents eventually had to pick the lock on the door, but when we walked into Seth's room, he wasn't there. What's more is that many of his things were gone, and there was a note on his bed that simply said, "Goodbye." My parents, of course, called the police and went through the whole missing child procedure. But it wasn't until I curiously turned on the monitor to Seth's computer that I got a little bit of information about just what was going on. The very first thing I noticed was that Seth's Yahoo Messenger was up, and there was an open conversation. The conversation was with my screen name, and Seth's screen name was Yahoo Stranger 1. It was him that had sent me that message. Seth had also left his cell phone behind. I suppose this was to keep our parents from being able to track him down. Remember all those times I thought I heard him arguing on the phone with someone? He had no calls in his history, other than from my parents. If he was arguing with someone, it was not on the phone. But the true scariness came from the fact that there was a long and detailed conversation on the Yahoo Messenger. It was between Yahoo Stranger 1 and the screen name that we knew was Seth's, and the conversation was horrid. The stranger was telling Seth over and over again to hurt me. There were these grisly and disgusting things that the messenger was telling him to do, and Seth's responses were adamant that he loved me, and he would never hurt me. There was a message that night, the one after I told Seth about what happened, that was the scariest. Yahoo Stranger 1, who I assumed now was Seth, told Seth to kill me, and Seth refused and argued with him, pleaded with him to leave him alone. I could tell in the messages that the conversation was causing my brother quite a lot of pain. Trying to figure out how Seth could be having an instant messenger conversation with himself, I looked at the timestamps of the messages and found that each one was at least 5 minutes apart. He had the passwords saved on his messenger for both accounts. I figured he had signed out and signed in on both names repeatedly, answering the messages since Yahoo allows you to send offline messages. I don't know if Seth is schizophrenic or if he has dissociative identity disorder, or if Yahoo Stranger 1 really was a different person. But what I am sure of is that the constant threats against me were what was weighing heavily on my brother all those months, and I have no doubt that the reason my brother, my best friend, left was that he was afraid he was actually going to hurt me. I keep hoping he'll come back one day. He's my brother and I love him. I could never be scared of him. Hey guys, what is up? Blue Spooky here, as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. I would like to give special thanks to my editor, Brennan Holyfield, for basically putting the whole video together for me. He did a lot of work on this one. It's a mega compilation of some of my greatest hits over the years, so to say. Let me know if you'd be interested in doing some of these more long videos. Maybe I could even re-record some of my older stories for them. Let me know what you guys think. I know I haven't really done stuff like this before, but I know a lot of other people do this sort of thing, so let me know if you guys like it on my channel. If you do, I'll do some more of it. If you guys like the video, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. Be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments below. As well, if you'd like to contact me, or if you have a story you'd like to submit for me to read, please be sure to check in the description of the video below. It contains links to all of my social media, including my Facebook, Twitter, and Gmail accounts. I'll try to read your messages as soon as possible, and get back to you when I can. If you guys do decide to send in a story, please be sure to make it legible. Please use spacing for the paragraphs. And please be sure to include as much detail as possible so that the story is not just 1 or 2 minutes long. Because then I have to include about 20 stories each episode. Your story might not get as much attention as it deserves, that sort of thing. So please be sure to be as detailed as you feel comfortable with. If you guys are curious about the art in this video, links to my artist will be in the description below. He does the art for pretty much all of my stuff, so he's a pretty great guy, and he does commissions as well. Be sure to check him out if you're interested. And if you're curious about the music used in this video, it's always in the description as well, in the order which it appears, with links to the artists. I think that's pretty much it for now, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.